As Phoebe said, welcome again to this is my third effort from the Firebrand Sprint trilogy. So we're sort of looking at this quarter. We were looking at cybersecurity, and this kind of rounds my three off, I suppose, really, with something that's very dear to my heart, as you can see, which is user training and awareness. And something also that covers a whole load of ground. And if you've been with me on my previous sprints, in fact, what you see that I tried to do is merge the cyber security side of life in with the infosec side of things, which is invariably what I do through some of the training courses that I'm responsible for. From the Firebrand perspective, then, this is me. Please grab my email as well and become my friend on LinkedIn if you're not already. I deliver a whole range of commercial courses, so the vendor courses for Firebrand training. I'm one of the permanent members of staff with Firebrand, so a permanent trainer with them. And really, I've kind of started off, I suppose, really from my experience in the military. I joined Microsoft and was actually with the Microsoft Academy for a couple of years before I really went off into the world of network and network security. So for Firebrand, I train all of these different areas, I suppose, really, mostly with a focus on security, but I still also keep a hand in with network infrastructure and a little bit of the Microsoft infrastructure stuff as well. So desktops and servers, for example. My main thrust, however, is at the bottom of this list, where you can see I am still the project lead, in fact, for the cybercrime portfolio that we put through. So a lot of law enforcement officers have come through Firebrand training and continue to come through us for a whole load of different foundation and advanced training from the investigation side of things all the way through to forensics. And now I'm very happy to announce the fact that I've now moved over as one of the SMEs from the cybersecurity apprenticeship program that we have been running now for several years, in fact, at Firebrand. And again, this is something that I've now taken on, in fact, as part of my full-time role and responsibility. So I'll be looking at this now up until the end of the year, and indeed into the new year as well, as things are pretty much changing within that world of the apprenticeships at Firebrand. And again, it's a good thing to keep an eye on if you are thinking about the apprenticeship program. Have a look and see what changes are happening, especially in the world of cyber and cybersecurity. This sprint, however, we are going to be talking about user training and awareness sessions, and I've kind of lovingly subtitled it the good, the bad, and the ineffective, because like me, potentially you have been on either training courses or been in briefings and meetings. We've had a lot of those, in fact, probably this year, where you've left the briefing room, whether it be a virtual room or physical room, and thought, yeah, actually that was kind of neat, or actually that was terrible, or meh, didn't really get very much from that. And what I'm kind of trying to do today, this morning, is to get us to think about stuff, I suppose, more than anything. So this is more of a thought-provoking session. And we're going to layer in, of course, a little bit of training with this as well. So we'll look at the way that policies are those kind of forgotten elements, I suppose, really, when we're dealing with cybersecurity, not so much in the world of infosec, it's true to say, but certainly from the technical side of cyber. Policies are something that generally is somebody else's work, but we're going to look a little bit about how important they actually are within the whole kind of range of cyber and cybersecurity. Like I said, this is going to be thought-provoking, hopefully. So I'm going to get you to think about yourself and the way that you conduct your business. And invariably, this could be you at home as well. So there's a little bit, hopefully, some elements of this that you can take away that you can use within your domestic environment. We're then going to talk about why user training and awareness is an important aspect. And there's no better way of thinking about this, and rather than from a certification point of view as well. So if you're looking at getting some kind of certification or doing courses with us, then you'll see invariably in all of the cybersecurity courses or security courses that we deliver that user training and awareness is an important aspect within that. And then I'm kind of going to take you through some do's and don'ts, I suppose, really, in providing an effective training session or an awareness session, really. So it doesn't necessarily have to be training as such, but just making your users or your business know about what are the current threats and ways to deliver that. And as Phoebe has said, then we'll layer in some questions all the way through, but feel free to start pinging Phoebe with questions as we go through, and we'll have a roundup towards the end of this morning Well, hopefully, if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer them for you. Um, as a trainer, invariably, he says with a big smile on his face, generally one of the worst questions you can ever ask a trainer is, "Hey, Phil, is this going to be in the test?" Because I can be stood in front of a whiteboard, albeit a virtual whiteboard in some instances as well, pouring my heart out about all kinds of different cybersecurity concepts. And the only question I get from invariably, you know that you've lost your audience when the only questions that you get is, "Hey, Phil, what time's lunch? And is this in the test?" But still those questions come. And so here we're talking about, is this going to be in the test? And I can absolutely 100%, well, 99.9%, because you never be 100% correct in security, can you? Say yes. User training and awareness will invariably always be the right answer. And I kind of jokingly say to my delegates across pretty much all of the courses that I deliver, that if you see an answer that says user training and awareness or words thereof, put a tick in the box because that's the right answer, and talk yourself out of why that is not the right answer. And so let's just try this one for good measure. And for those of you that I've either had the pleasure of training with or you've been on my sessions before, you know that Phil is all about analogy. And I love to use sort of real world analogies in everything that I deliver. So here's the first question. A virus has infected a system on your network. You need to ensure that it does not spread to the rest of the systems on your network. What would be the best course of action? So this might be relevant. In fact, if we take it outside of a non-cybersecurity environment. And so carry on regardless, because it only affects old systems. Hold a rave or a party, because you know what? It only affects old systems. Turn everything off and hope for the best, because it'll all be over by Christmas. Is this sounding relevant to anybody? Or user training and awareness. And so hopefully you can see that by layering in a little bit of user training and awareness, you would be able to effectively stop the spread of this virus from going from one system to another. And so, of course, D is the right answer. So if you get nothing else from this session with me today, what I can almost guarantee is that you will get a point on the next security exam or test that you take. Now, of course, that's not guaranteed, 99.9%. And like I said, talk yourself out of why that is not going to be the right answer. Now, if we bring this over, of course, into life, talk yourself why this is not the right answer in the way that you're conducting your business, and especially at this moment in time. So again, virus aside, we need to start looking at things, and invariably the first port of call for us is going to be policy. Now, my background is pretty much all about technology, and I love nothing better than getting stuck into things like firewalls and IDSs and IPSs and all that kind of stuff. And indeed, some of the courses that I deliver are pretty much all about network security. And again, you might have come on, I think my last one, in fact, where I did network security. We started to talk about things like firewalls and routers and switches and things like that. And that's all great. And again, depending upon the area of business that you are responsible in, however, all of those great technical controls that we talk about are controlled by policy. Okay, so these are what we call the procedural controls. And for those of you that look at this from an InfoSec point of view, will know that what we do is we layer in lines of defense. And again, this is defense in depth, invariably, that I'm talking about here. So physical controls, technical controls, and procedural controls, you can see, all come together to give us a layer of defense when we're looking at things from a cybersecurity point of view. And again, we can talk all day long about things like confidentiality, integrity, and availability, another great framework that we put into place for things like data protection. Now, this morning, I'm not going to talk to you in too much depth and detail about what all of these controls mean, but you can see some examples here on the slide. So the physical controls, the technical controls, and the procedural controls. What we're interested in here today is more about the procedural controls that we're putting into place, and that's going to be underpinned by a policy. Policies just go on and on and on and on, I have to say. And invariably in the early days, when I first, I suppose, came out of the military, where I was involved in the decision-making side of things and the policy side of things to a small extent. It was one of those kind of things from a training environment that you kind of generally just switched off a little bit because it was paperwork, it was somebody else's job. As you start to move up the scale, I suppose, really, and again, we're not necessarily here talking about going up into the management side of things here. In fact, very much not into the management side of things. Good policy is going to be the key to success in pretty much all of these effective areas that we see across all of those three different parts of security. So from the physical side of things, from the technical side of things, for example. And here's just I suppose, a couple of examples for you to think about when we're looking at policies. Now, for those of us that write policies, we kind of get stuck into the detail. And again, it's an example that I put into place on some of the courses, especially with my apprentices, in fact, where I'll get them to write an acceptable usage policy. So what can you do and what can't you do on a network, for example, and what can you use a corporate computer for and what you can you not use a corporate computer for? And I can almost guarantee that 9 times out of 10, and there's no mistake in this at all, that my delegates will get straight stuck into the detail about you can't go out onto gambling sites, you cannot go out onto nefarious pornography sites and so on and so forth, and you can't have fun on the internet on a corporate laptop, for example. And all of these things are, of course, very important for you to make a decision on about acceptable usage from that policy. But what they forget to do is, if you like, the nuts and bolts about the scope of the policy. So to whom does it apply? And then we start to think about actually managing the policy as well. So here we're talking more about the management of this thing called a policy. So, and again, hopefully this kind of makes sense. It's got to be clearly written and defined. So people need to know exactly what its contents mean without using effectively too much jargon. And again, policy sometimes can be a little bit legalese. They can use a lot of legal terms and definitions which need to be known and understood by the end users. So you need to know invariably to whom this policy is going to apply as well. So you need to know the scope. Of course, it's got to be supported this time at the upper echelon as well. So if you don't get senior management write-off on your policy, then it's not worth the paper it's written on. It's got to obviously be relevant. Your users will need to know where to access the information should they need to go back and refresh themselves from the policy or be aware of its existence. And also it's got to be enforceable. So again, something really here we're talking about from an HR point of view, where we're looking at are there any disciplinary measures that need to be taken on board here if a user falls foul of one of the policies? And of course, from a security point of view, it's highly likely that that invariably is the case. And the key thing here, and I have to say that this is probably where we all let ourselves down a little bit here, because lots of businesses and organizations will have great policies. The actual creation and the procedure of creating a policy and implementing this is known and is well used. The thing we kind of let ourselves down with, however, is that it then goes onto a dusty shelf where it never gets looked at again. And so the key thing here is that it must also be regularly reviewed and kept up to date. Now, again, I apologize to all of you that are on this call that are now going, well, actually, we keep an eye on our policies and we look after them, so on and so forth. Then great. Okay. But I would probably suggest also that you're in the minority of most organizations. And again, in recent times, of course, people have been too busy looking in other directions than thinking about the actual policies themselves. And the point I'm hopefully going to get across to you this morning is that now is the absolute perfect time to have a little look at some of these policies. Okay, we're talking here about the user training and awareness policy, but all of them invariably will need some kind of regular review. How regular is regular? Well, that's a question that we're going to answer later on. If we think about our user training and awareness policy, or whatever you want to call it, there's no real definition to this, but this is probably my favorite. Okay, there's a difference between training and awareness, I have to say as well. So there are plenty of times when I have trained people. There are plenty of times invariably where I've trained people and they've been certified, but I could still wave goodbye to them and think, well, do you know what? They've got the piece of paper, but now they need to invariably have to get some experience with this product or with this technology because they still really don't have an understanding about how they're going to implement that. So there is a difference here. Now, that doesn't happen very often, of course. because and invariably what we like to do, of course, is make sure that people are competent before they actually get certified in areas, but it does slip through the net sometimes. Let's have a little think about security itself then. And again, it's a very dynamic environment, isn't it? So again, it doesn't really need much of a scientific background to think about how, from a technological point of view, the world has changed over recent years. And again, here I'm talking about going back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You could go back even further if you wish, or you could go back even sooner. So think about how things have changed over the past 12 months from a technology point of view. And again, you could see invariably that technology has changed immeasurably, in fact, over this period of time. So even if we're talking about 12 or 18 months, or maybe a couple of years, things have changed considerably. So we've moved into a generation invariably, which is invariably led online. So whether that be through implementation of cloud technologies, for example, the Internet of Things, of course, so smart devices, which are now ruling our life. And again, we're getting more automated. So automated systems that come into place with artificial intelligence, for example, and all of these technologies are invariably not only being implemented, of course, from a domestic point of view, but they're coming into our business, into our corporate lives as well. Okay, so invariably, this is all I want you to start thinking about, is the fact that security, again, here I'm talking about the technological side of things again, but you could also think about this from the physical side of things. So if you're thinking about how the world has changed from the physical side of things, then we also then have to layer that into our working practices as well. Hand in hand with that, then we have to then start to think about all those people that look after the subject of risk. We'll be looking at the way that the threat has changed. And again, here we can start to use the word immeasurably, because if we're going back in those timescales that I had on the previous slide, where we're going back maybe 5 or 10 years, but even if we were going back just several years, in fact, so even if we're going back 12 months to 24 months, things have, of course, changed a lot over these years. And the kind of technologies, I suppose, really in the way that we do our business now has also changed. And a lot of that, of course, has been with the explosion of online resources. So again, doesn't necessarily have to be what's on this list, I have to say, but cloud, social media are two things that play a big part in our lives. And of course, coupled in with that will also be the way that data protection has changed. No longer are we storing paper-based hard copies of data in rusty old filing cabinets. Well, you still may be doing that, of course, but invariably the majority of us now have got some kind of digital format where we are storing data, whether that be in-house on premise or up in the cloud. There are huge changes that have taken place. And as I've already mentioned, of course, we are getting a lot smarter with our technologies. And I defy pretty much anybody on this call, if you are geeky enough, there I've used the term once already, you'll have an Alexa, you will have Google assistants, you will have something invariably within your home environment that is classified as an Internet of Things, so CCTV systems, IP cameras, all of that kind of stuff. And again, things are getting smarter by the day. If we then couple that in with a thought about how crime has changed, well, to be completely honest with you, crime really hasn't changed very much over several decades, over centuries, in fact, because criminals still pretty much have the same kind of intent of whatever their damage is, either to defraud us, to rob us, to mug us, to hurt us in some shape or form, whether that be physically or emotionally. Those crimes have been with us, unfortunately, since we started walking the planet. And so, again, all we've done here is probably layered in different types of crime, really, that have morphed alongside the different types of technologies now that criminals use. So, and again, the kind of the buzzword, I suppose, really is to slap the word cyber in front of everything. So when we start talking about things like cyber criminals and cyber crime and cyber enabled crime, those are the terminology that we now use. But effectively, crime is still crime, and the end result of the criminals that are perpetrating these crimes is exactly the same as it always has been. So invariably what we've got is a constant that is running through everything that are new technologies. Of course, when we're looking at things like such as risk, of course, the threats have changed in line with the technology. So the vulnerabilities that we have by layering in all of these new technologies, either from a home point of view or from a business point of view, criminals are always going to be adapting and adopting their technologies. And invariably, if there are any police officers on the call today, and I know that there are a couple of you out there, I'm hoping that you're kind of nodding your head in the fact that you will remember, if you have any kind of experience, the good old days of looking at, if you like, traditional crime. And of course, all of that has changed as technology has gained momentum. So criminals have now got access to different types of physical tools or different types of weapons and things like that. And so they adapt and they adopt their methodologies to suit whatever tools they have available to them. But their intent ultimately has remained the same. And that's to either gain illegally more money, or to defraud us, or to harm us in some shape or form. And the world of cyber, of course, is no different. And all they've done is adapted to new technologies and started to hurt us and hit us by using online methods, for example. The bigger our online presence, of course, the bigger the threat. So it kind of goes hand in hand, doesn't it, that things have changed. If you are looking at this from the world of the analysis side of things, and invariably, anybody within the world of cybersecurity, it doesn't really matter what role or responsibility you have. So whether you're looking at it from an infosec side of things, from risk management, if you are an intrusion analyst, for example, so if you're looking at it from a defend and protect side of things, then you also have to think about what's on the horizon. And that's what we call horizon scanning. And this is the general term really for looking at managing risks and threats that are around the corner, if you like. Now, the world is a strange place. I mean, it's a strange place at this moment in time. But let's just cast our minds back. This is perfect time, in fact. Let's take our minds back not too far to this time last year. I think, in fact, my wife told me yesterday. I think yesterday was this week at some point was the first report of this virus that was coming out of China. I don't know if you picked up on this on the news, but it's been quite big. As it's moved through. And again, let's put ourselves in the position of most people. And again, I'm assuming that most of us are probably here in the Western Hemisphere, in some part of Europe, UK or Western Europe on this call. Who'd have thought it? Okay, when we were looking at something that was in the distance over in China, none of us were probably planning a trip to China at that point in time, and probably none of us were having any kind of close contact with people coming back from China. Of course, you may well have been from a business point of view, but nobody could probably have foreseen how the 12 months from this time last year was going to actually unfold from us. So no government would have been able to have forecast this. But what governments do is just that. Okay, so and again, I apologize to my European friends. I will include you. I am actually in France at the moment. So, and of course, the UK is still in Europe, even though things are going to change in the new year. But here I'm layering in a couple of British and UK government assets that we have when we look at this thing called horizon scanning. And the UK government uses this a lot, not just for, and invariably all governments use these tools a lot, not just for the world of cyber, but also for things like economic, financial, social types of events that are likely to happen. And again, what they have to do is start to predict things over the coming months and years. Now, pandemic aside, because nobody could really see that coming, when we're looking at social economic prediction and things like this, we have some experts that look at the way that the finances and the way that things are going to move on. And again, it's very difficult to predict these kind of things, but these are the experts that look after this for us. Thinking about the world of cyber, however, and we're thinking about the layers of technology that are likely to move forwards over the next 6 to 12 months, and then over the next couple of years, and indeed then over the next 5 years, nobody really can predict that. Okay, so it's a very, very difficult job to do when it comes to horizon scanning, when we're thinking about potential future threats from the world of cyber. Because if we go back to the previous slide, when we're looking at the pace of change historically for us, okay, and again, there's lots of I suppose, jokes that knock around now with how far we've come now when we're dealing with things like the good old ZX Spectrums and tape drives and things like that, and now moving up into cloud and Internet of Things and quantum computing and things like that are invariably on the horizon. And all of these things are going to be tantamount to new threats and new risks. But if we think about future crimes, all criminals are going to do is adapt and adopt these new technologies, okay, to still meet the same old aims that they've been meeting over the past hundreds of years, where criminals have been acting against us. So from a criminal perspective, even though the end result, the impact is pretty much the same, of course, the threat is going to change. And invariably, the bigger the footprint that we create by changing our technologies, the bigger the threat is going to be against us. And what we have to do, of course, is step up. We need to be changing things in order to meet these new threats and these new risks that are going to come across us. And again, not just from a criminal point of view. Firebrand training, of course, have not been slow in adapting to technologies. And again, I'm not going to, this is not going to be an extension of the news. Difficult not to mention the pandemic and the way that 2020 has unfolded. Invariably, for the majority of us on this call, we have all seen a change in our business practice. Most of us at this moment in time, in fact, are either working from home. We've certainly have changed our working routines. And even if it's not impacted you directly, there will be invariably somebody within your organization or company which has been impacted directly. And so again, Firebrand is a classic example of this. So an organization that has changed very quickly, in fact, and adapted and adopted new technologies to meet the ends of their users. So to support their users, that's myself on this call, and indeed so that we can continue to do things like this, okay, and conduct invariably for us. There was a period where we were pretty much in the middle part of 2020 just doing online deliveries. So the technology had to change. The support needed to go out to our staff at Firebrand, for example, so equipment changes and so on and so forth. And again, we're not alone in this, of course. It would be exactly the same. So if we think about recent events, all of this is true. Okay, this is the view from what I can see at this moment in time. So this is my new office, in fact, which is invariably the spare bedroom, and this is me, in fact, conducting a. I think this is a law enforcement course. So this is a open source intelligence course, which we're using something called reverse hybrid. So I'm actually beaming in. There's a trainer actually physically in the classroom here, and Phil is coming in virtually into this group of individuals. And we have people in the classroom, we have people online, all doing the same kind of course. And of course, that's a huge shift change for the organization that I work for. And how do we meet that? Well, we had to meet that by changing our working practices and our conditions. The technology has changed. So we are using Cisco WebEx, for example, which was not a piece of software that I knew 12 months ago. And so things like Teams and Zoom, so the technologies we're using today. And again, if we cast our mind back to sort of 12 months, 24 months ago, how many users actually heard of Zoom and Teams and WebEx and never thought that it would be actually used? Now, again, I know a lot of us were using these online delivery mechanisms, but invariably they were just for meetings and not for delivering briefings or in our case, training sessions and things like that, and running our core business invariably through them. Again, the other implementations here would be things like VPNs, remote access solutions, which needed to be adapted and adopted and moved very quickly into the production environment so that your businesses would be able to maintain whatever they were doing through some kind of continuity arrangement. So here we're talking about business continuity. And again, that's a policy, isn't it? So we're talking very much about underlying policies here. What hasn't changed, however, as I've suggested before, is the fact that criminals still have the same kind of intent. And again, those of us that invariably look at the world of the threat that comes from the criminal fraternity, and again, over the years, and a lot of this has been glamorized through sort of Hollywood and things like that. And sometimes it's very difficult, isn't it, to tell the bad guy from the good guy invariably, where we're talking about people that break into banks and things like that in the city by tunneling underneath and getting it and invariably stealing stuff under the noses of security people and the police forces and things like that. They're villains because they're locked up and the police catch them, but then they make a movie about it and you think, well, actually these are 60, 70-year-old men I'm talking about here, if you remember this story. And they're kind of almost turned into sort of like Robin Hood characters where they're not. These are people that have stole other people's property and have devastated lives by doing this. And what criminals do is just that. Okay, they adapt and they adopt their techniques. And there were some fairly horrific stories from lockdown, of course, where a lot of, for example, drug dealers and people that generally work on the street obviously had their wings clipped by virtue of the fact that they would stand out like a sore thumb if they were now seen out and about touting for business, for example. So what did they do? They adapted and adopted their business. So a lot of this also then went online, of course. And a lot of them, invariably, there were reports here in the UK, and again, I'm sure it probably possibly happened across Europe as well, where these people started to masquerade as health workers, for example, and were in the queue outside of supermarkets and things like that, still dealing drugs. So they kind of adapted and overcame. And invariably, without making these people heroes, you have to take your hat off to the fact that they're quite ingenious in the way that they can adapt and adopt their criminal activities to meet whatever technology and whatever situation that they have. If you like, criminals have a business continuity plan, just like we have business continuity plans. The problem is, of course, we have to defend ourselves against theirs. And so when we're looking at the intentions of criminals, again, that's not really changed. The threat, however, has changed. Okay. And so our footprint is now a lot bigger, which means invariably there are more holes in our defense for them to eke into. And so my question here today is what hasn't changed, especially over the past 12 months. And if we look at ourselves internally here, with all of this upheaval, with all of this change in working practices and working conditions and technology that we've layered into our users to get them to continue with our business, have we actually taken a look at the policies that are supporting them? And in particular, of course, user training and awareness policies. And so, in my opinion, and hopefully you will agree based on the facts that we've kind of delivered here, is that at this moment in time, and probably sooner than me talking to you this morning, there's been no better time in starting to layer some of this in to our users. Okay, this may be invariably implemented as part of your updated policy. And then part of that policy would be then to get this message and deliver it out to your users. Now, this is where I'm kind of making, I suppose, a little bit of a change between training somebody and also then making them aware of this. And again, you've possibly been on training courses where you've been taught how to use a tool, but you don't really know what's going on underneath the hood. You don't really know why you're using that tool. Why are we doing this? And again, if you come out with questions such as, why am I doing this, Phil? What's happening in the background and things like that? I love that from a training point of view, because what I love nothing better, of course, is to get into the nuts and bolts of a technology or get into the inner workings of it. So if you can describe it so that a user has got a fundamental understanding about why are they doing something, why do they need to use multi-factor authentication, why do they need to use a VPN, why are they getting access to data by coming through these different mechanisms and means, then invariably you empower them with a little bit of understanding and knowledge, which means that not only will you have an effective, efficient worker, you're also then going to have somebody who's also looking after you from the point of view of things like data protection. And of course, that may also mean that you are now staying within the compliancy arrangements of regulations and laws that you need to adhere to. And I wonder how many of us invariably have pushed the scope of data protection, regulatory compliance, in fact, in some cases as well, legal arrangements as well, just by purely getting our businesses continuing to run and operate by throwing this technology out to our users with things like VPNs and remote access and so on and so forth, and not really paying much attention to security underneath that. Okay, again, I'm hoping that on this call, of course, you're all saying, no, Phil, it's not us, because we very much have this in line. But I can almost guarantee that there will be some small businesses out there, okay, some sort of less large enterprises, and invariably also going into larger enterprises where these businesses have not properly protected themselves by virtue of the fact they've been desperate to keep their businesses running. And I totally understand this. I totally understand this. When I first left the military and came into, invariably it was in the world of Microsoft, security was very much an afterthought. And to some extent and purposes, it still is, invariably in some business processes as well. And so we now are trying to get across this security by design. So it's actually implemented at the initial stages when we're designing things like software development and looking at project management and things like that. And again, these security aspects are absolutely crucial in this. So the rollout of new technologies, the changes and the upheaval that has taken place over the past 12 months in our organizations, security should have been at the forefront of this. And if it wasn't, of course, trying to retrospectively fit it into place is always going to be more costly and create more time for you. So if we're trying to do this in the background now, we probably left it a little too late, I have to say, but better late than never, I suppose, really is the message that we are thinking about here. Okay. Okay, with that, I think invariably giving you a little bit of thought into a tea break. So Phoebe, if you're happy, I think by my watch, that's sort of by what my watch at European time, it's 10:45ish. So it's 9:45 in the UK.
Yeah.
So is that okay for a tea break, Phoebe? Is everybody happy with that? All good. Perfect. Right. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully suitably refreshed. This little section, then, I'm going to just build on a little bit of this policy stuff with you then and hone in on the user awareness side of things. So you'll remember the sort of from some of the early slides, we tried to define what a policy was and what it should be. And you can see here that all I've done is effectively repeated myself. And so try not to repeat yourself too much when you're doing user training and awareness sessions. But when it comes to creating a policy for user awareness, your sessions should really follow the policy. So here you can see we're talking about being clear and well defined. So there's got to be a purpose for it. And it's got to be relevant to your organization. There's no point talking about threats and different kind of areas of technology if you're not actually employing them or using them, or if the threat is not significant enough to your organization. The strange thing here is that how regular is regular? Well, that almost sounds like a medical thing, doesn't it? But we've all probably been in a situation where it's that time of year again. Have you ever sort of said that when there's a training event or somebody comes in from a department, or you've got to be somewhere to do something because it's mandated that you have to be there, which is kind of always puts whoever is training or delivering that session on the back foot, because you know that you've got a whole load of press men coming towards you. They don't really want to be there. They've been told that they've got to be there at this particular point in the cycle of events within the organization. And as soon as your user training and awareness sessions become that, then it's always going to be an uphill struggle to actually capture the audience and get them on board with the message that you're going to send. And again, this is not just about user training and awareness. This could be any kind of training and awareness events that took place. And again, I use myself as a classic example here. I was in the Royal Air Force for probably too many years that I'd care to mention, but I was there for a long time. Now, we pride ourselves in the RAF that we wore blue and not green. The unfortunate thing for me was that I spent most of my time, unfortunately, wearing green because I was either in trouble or in the wrong place at the wrong time and doing stuff that really I didn't really want to be doing, if truth be told. I'd rather wear a blue uniform than wear a green one and sit alongside people in the army. Great job that we did, of course. In order to get to that point in time, I had to do regular training, which meant that I had to put a whole load of green stuff on and run around and play soldiers, and all kinds of things took place. And this, if there are any military people out here, the Army do this a lot. They do a lot of training, obviously, in those kind of environments. The Royal Air Force, however, most of our work is done with nice shiny shoes on and blue, nicely pressed trousers and Wedgwood blue shirts. We don't run around with bits of grass sticking out of our hair and shooting things and things like that. Obviously, now things have morphed a little bit and things do change. So once a year, you had to do something called your general service knowledge training or field training and things like that, where they would put you over probably a day or 2 days, where you would have to do firefighting and first aid and ground defense training and put a respirator on, and they would throw you in some CS pellets and gas you for 10 minutes to see whether or not they can make you cry. And then you put some rounds down on a range and shoot targets and things like that. Now, some of that was enjoyable and fun, I must admit, but being gassed and being cold, wet, and horrible, and standing outside of the fire section when it's pouring down with rain was not fun. And I used to dread it. Every year it would come round. I knew I had to do it because you had to have it was mandatory. It had to be signed off. And if you didn't do it, then whoever was supervising you would chase you and say, Phil, you need to go to the GDT section, or the RAF regiment did it for us in the Royal Air Force, and get the tick in the box. And invariably you just marched over there. Well, I didn't march because I was in the Royal Air Force, but you bimbled over to the section. You hated every single moment of it. And then when you actually completed it, you thought, actually, it wasn't too bad. But you knew that you would go through exactly the same kind of mental process the following year when you thought, do you know what? I really don't want to be doing this. Okay. The reality is, of course, if that was a little bit more snappy and a little bit more relevant to my working environment, which it wasn't in most cases, then I probably would have gone with a skip in my step and thought, actually, I'm going to get something out of this. The reality is, of course, that all of that training was effective and efficient. And I have to say that it was so well delivered, in fact, that even years on, now that I've left the military, I can still remember most of it. So I'm still kind of handy with a fire extinguisher. I'm okay with first aid. I could probably still shoot in a straight line. Not that I could in the first place, but you get my point. But the training was so effective that it's kind of stayed with me. So even though I didn't necessarily enjoy the process, the people that were in charge of this were so effective at training and managing the training environment and trying to make it as relevant as they possibly could to my working environment, that it has stayed with me, and it will probably stay with me to the rest of my days. So what I'm not suggesting is that you're going to get people running around and doing all kinds of physical security controls and things like that, but you could do, depending upon the environment that you work on. But it's got to be worth attending. It's got to there has to be some payback for the users in here, and they've got to take something away from the whole event. Because as soon as it becomes a dredge and becomes a sort of a boring necessity, then you've lost them, and it's a pointless exercise. I've also put into place, just like any other policies, that it's got to be documented. Okay, so this would be, how regular is regular? We're going to discuss this in a little bit, but it should be a mandatory part of a user's experience on your network. And I'm not just talking about as soon as they come through the door, they sign a whole load of paperwork, and one of those is the security policy. Another one is that they need to go to the IT department and be signed on to receive their equipment, and so on and so forth. They sign a piece of paper because, like most new joiners in an organization, your head is somewhere else, rather than reading and understanding the security implications of what that policy actually is. There's a lot of stuff that's going into a new joiner's head: new people, new environment, new working conditions, and generally kind of finding their feet within the organization. And they sign a lot of paperwork and a lot of documents to do with HR and IT and security and so on and so forth, and really none of it sticks. It's only further down the line, if they're then, once they're more comfortable with your organization, with the running processes, that stuff is going to make sense to them. So it makes sense to routinely and regularly get people to take a look at your security policies and all of the other policies, in fact, which are relevant to the way that they conduct their business and the way they do their organization, without it becoming a bit of a kind of a routine event that becomes a bit of a chore for them. And again, I can use myself as an example here, because every year within the environment that I work in fact, so working with a lot of younger people from the apprenticeship side of things, then I have to go through a whole series of online training. So there are about 6 different courses that I have to take on diversity and equality and protect and prevent and all of these kind of things. There's a counter-terrorism one that I've just completed and things like that. And it can become a bit of a chore unless you actually go in with your eyes open and think, actually, no, I'm going to learn something from this. It's a refresh for me in most cases, it's true to say. But I always kind of go in with my eyes open to the fact that even though probably 70 or 80% of it is a repeat of what I saw last year, there was always something that I take away from those sessions and think, well, actually, I didn't know that. I've learned something about that, and so on and so forth. And again, an example of this is that I've spent many a good year, in fact, in the world of CT doing counterterrorism as part of the last thing that I did in the military. And I've recently had to take part in an online counterterrorism thing that's sponsored by the UK government, which was very, very well put together. It's a whole series of videos where you have to spot the suspicious parcel and the suspicious person and look for mannerisms and things like that. It's very, very well done. And I loved it. And I actually got stuff from it, and I didn't get 100% in the little modular tests that went through. So there's a bit of learning to be had with that. And it doesn't really matter how experienced you are in this, it will work for everybody. Okay. And so this also then comes down to knowing your audience and how you're actually going to pitch these things. And again, I'll discuss these things with you in a little bit when we get into sort of the nuts and bolts of how to invariably create an effective user training and awareness program. The kind of things that we are looking at then, again, the key thing here that I've missed out is, of course, is that, this is the message I'm trying to get across to you this morning, is that it's got to be updated and kept up to date. And now is a good time to be considering this, is what I'm suggesting. If not, if you haven't already implemented and updated your security policies in line with changes in business practices, now's a good time to start thinking about it. And again, this is a good time of the year, I suppose, really, if you're going into the end of the year or into the new year, when people would expect to have some kind of refresh, I suppose, from a policy point of view, from working practices and things like that. Okay, so kind of make this your New Year's resolution or your Christmas bonus to your users, whichever way you're going to do it. Things to generally consider. Now, again, there's no right and wrong answer to this, and I'm very, very happy for people to start throwing comments at what they're using, in fact, because it's always good to get some feedback on these kind of areas. And again, everybody uses different methods, I suppose, really. Posters and these sort of infographics and things like that are thrown around a lot. You see a lot of these things on LinkedIn, for example, that come from a whole load of different organizations, some government sponsored, some are commercial enterprises, and they're generally quite good, but they have minimal, they have a maximum impact, but only for a short period of time. If you are walking down a corridor, for example, and you see a poster that's health and safety or something to do with some kind of directive, yeah, you take a look at it, you absorb it for this few seconds that you're passing it, and then you instantly forget it. If that poster remains in place for weeks on weeks and months and years, you'll just ignore it because you've already read it, you've already seen it. So you're no longer reviewing and refreshing your users to the impact or the statement that you're trying to put across to them. Even if the poster changes, sometimes people will say, oh yeah, that poster, and they don't even bother looking at it. So you may have found that, in fact, you have changed a poster, but because it's in exactly the same place as it was previously, people are just walking past it because they think they've already read it. Again, there's a kind of a joking term that we use. I don't know how it translates into French, Belgian, German, or Dutch, but they call them PP posters. And these are the little messages that you get above the urinals in a gents' loo. Ladies, unfortunately, I think these go on the back of the door in the ladies, but I don't frequent ladies' toilets that often anymore. Not since obviously the case. And so these are great places, of course, where people have got a couple of minutes or so when they just sort of sit and reflect. And if they're staring at the back of the loo door, or if they're having a wee and they're looking up, it's not a bad place to actually put a little message. And if you change them frequently, then the message, the impact is going to be a good one. But invariably, of course, there's cost with this because a constant change of this material is obviously going to have a cost implication on you. So if you're going to use this as a method, and I'm not suggesting it's a bad way of getting the message across, make sure that they're routinely or regularly updated. And again, think about different locations for them as well, where they're going to actually catch people's attention and maybe even get them talking about it as well, which is even better. Probably one of the ones that have the minimal impact is when you email or have some kind of online bulletin that goes across to your users, because they're busy people. Everybody is busy in your organization. And so it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about the sales team or the developers or the IT department or the managers. They're all too busy to see some kind of thing that's come from the security department or from the IT department that's telling them about password policy changes and the current threat from online activities and things like that. They've seen it all before anyway. And so all they're going to do is either move it over into their red bin or delete it and not actually read the contents of it. So even though I'm suggesting it's not necessarily don't do it, just be aware of the fact that that is invariably going to have the minimal impact unless there's some way that you're going to get a read delivery, some kind of acknowledgement of the fact that the user has read it, okay, and you're able to actually effectively audit that. So it's been delivered to a user and they've actually spent some time reading it. But again, we're now talking about technologies that a lot of organizations probably don't implement and probably don't need to implement. The thing that we've already mentioned, in fact, of course, here when we're talking about actual policy documents which are signed. And again, I've mentioned these. We all go through a round of signing a whole load of paperwork when you first join an organization. Some of it will have an impact on you. Some of it is important to, well, all of it is important to you. And most of it goes invariably in one ear and out of the other very, very quickly because once again, users are very busy. Their minds are elsewhere when they join an organization. And so these policy documents have maximum impact at the time when they read and sign them, but minimum impact pretty much 5 minutes after that event. Unless, of course, this is something that you're obliged to do on a regular basis. The key thing with this is that even though they may have minimal impact, of course, they are highly auditable. So if your signature, excuse me, is against a policy document, I'll just have a quick slurp of coffee, excuse me. Excuse me. They are very auditable. So again, so from a disciplinary point of view, there's no getting away from the fact that if you've signed this policy document, then it needs to be adhered to. Now, again, here is where you could be using, actually giving your users a degree of help in the fact if you are routinely or regularly getting them to review these policy documents, then hopefully they won't actually fall foul of it and they will be made aware of the fact that, of course, there are security implications in place. Also, of course, if you're changing anything, then it's mandatory. You have to do that. Okay, so make them aware of the changes. And there's no better way of doing that, I suppose, really, than actually having a signed policy document. I've already mentioned the fact that I undergo all of this. And again, I'm probably not alone on this call. And people that do these online video and learning platforms, they generally, as long as the users go in with the right frame of mind, they generally have good impact and are auditable, but resource them well. There are some great ones available to you. And again, if you're interested in the ones that we use, then just drop me a quick email and I can layer in the diversity ones that, like I said, the CT one that's come from the UK government. All of these are generally free resources as well. A lot of them are sponsored by our national governments, and they would also then translate into different languages as well. So our friends across Europe use exactly the same kind of techniques as well. And they may take up an hour of your time to actually complete them properly. But they're generally well resourced, and I said anything that's got multimedia in generally has a good impact on you, and you can generally learn stuff from that as well. And it does us no harm, in fact, to actually keep ourselves routinely and regularly updated with these as well. And again, they're as I said, if they're resourced well, they can be very, very cheap. No expense to you whatsoever. One that I'm just going to highlight on this slide, in fact, to you again. I apologize to my European friends. This is a UK government site that we're talking about, the NCSC. Okay, they have cybersecurity training packages which are available to you for free. In fact, in some cases, you can actually slap your own logo on them as well. So you can turn them into your own corporate training sessions as well. And these are very good. So they're well worth researching and having a look at what resources are locally available to you. I also know firsthand that the French government do the same thing, because I keep an eye on the French cybersecurity sites out here as well. And I have no doubt that the Dutch, the Belgians, and the Germans do exactly the same thing. We're very much linked up and hooked into the same kind of mind frame here. And then that leads me into, I suppose, what I'm going to talk about in the next little session, in fact, after a tea break, is really how to conduct a good in-house session, which generally will have a good impact if they're conducted well, and maybe audited as well. So you'd have a sign-in sheet, for example, and remember that these would be a mandatory invariably. So all staff, from senior execs all the way down to your end users, should be seen to be taking part in these. And of course, for the maximum impact, want to have a combination of the above. So anything at all where you can use mixed media, for example, it's generally going to have the maximum kind of impact for you. And if you implement some of the kind of the tips that I've spoken about here, so moving your posters around and invariably changing the messages and so on and so forth, you'll generally find that the message will get through. And a lot of the times as well, it's quite a subliminal message as well. Users don't even know that they're being updated and made aware of security arrangements just by virtue of the fact that things are constantly changing and dynamic. And again, that then takes me back to the point I'm making in the previous little session about how dynamic and constantly changing a world are we living in at this moment in time. Of course, we also have to counter this with the fact that there's a lot of other stuff that's going on rather than the cybersecurity side of things that are taking place as well. And probably most of us are in an organization that has got wear a face mask, wash your hands, and distance posters up as well. And of course, these are priority messages to get out to your users, because here we're talking about the well-being of our users. So their health and life comes, of course, above all other kind of risks that we need to put into place as well. So again, these have to be well thought out, I suppose, really, so that they don't become tiresome and boring. But we're all guilty, I would suggest here, because we're all human, of familiarity here. So we get very, very familiar with where something is and what the message is, that we kind of switch off a little bit. And again, it is happening across Europe, because I live in Europe, is that the general public are now getting very, very tired with COVID-19. They're getting tired of it to the point where they're letting their guard down, to the point where, do you know what? We're just going to push the boundaries of government guidelines, because guidelines are not regulation, they're not law. Although, of course, there are laws in place now that restrict movements and things like that. But the general public will start to push the boundaries here. And effectively what that does, of course, it just opens up the risk of further infection and so on and so forth. So again, even though the virus is something that's above and beyond everything we're talking about here, it's a great analogy to use in the way that people's minds actually work in this environment as well. So people invariably are their own worst enemy when it comes to the security of both their own health, of course, and of course of our networks. Things to also avoid, I suppose, really. And again, it's something that within the world of IT is difficult not to use jargon, I suppose. So, constantly repeating the same message is something ultimately to avoid. But you repeat the same message, but you put it in a slightly different format each time you repeat that message. So that's invariably the crux of what that means. Technical jargon is something that will invariably switch most users off. If you're trying to explain a concept to somebody, start to think about analogies. I love these kind of things where you can get it down into body parts or into things that are happening in the world. So get creative with it. Use your imagination a little bit and start to think about how you would explain that. And when I was, in fact, when I first started training, my kids were reasonably small. My son was not really interested in IT, admittedly, but I used to try things out on him, and he was probably only around about 8 or 9, I suppose. And my very first A+ course, so my very first hardware course that I delivered, and teaching somebody how to strip out down a computer and identify a processor and where the RAM went and all of that kind of stuff, I did in front of Aaron. So he was a young lad, and I literally opened up the cabinet, took the bits out, explained to them what they were and what they did and where they went, and then let him explain to me what the bits did and where they went in the computer. And I thought, as soon as I can teach an 8-year-old lad who's not really interested in IT what each of those component parts did and where they went onto the motherboard, and he was able to actually click it all into place and wire it up with no interest in it whatsoever. And I have to say that he's not gone off into the world of IT at all. So I didn't light his imagination with this. I thought, now I can actually teach this, because I'm now able to put this across without using a whole load of jargon, without using a whole load of technological know-how, I suppose, really, to get somebody to do invariably the basic fundamentals of building a computer, repairing a computer, and explaining to me invariably in words of one syllable what each bit does. I'm happy with that. Okay. Now, again, you need to know your audience here, because some people love a little bit of technical jargon. Okay. Geeks and freaks is what they are. And my friends, without insulting too many of you, the world that we live in is full of geeks and freaks. In fact, my wife called me a geek a couple of days ago, which is, it's just hurtful, really, is what it is. But I know what she means. Okay. And again, there's a part of me that thinks the word nerd now in the UK is now almost like a badge of honor. Kids love to be nerds and geeks and things like that, because it means that they're up with technology, and the kids are up with the kids, is what they are. People like me, who are old enough to know better, fail to be up with the kids, but I still like to refer to myself as a geek and a nerd occasionally. And trust me, when I'm walking around the environments which are the hallowed grounds of Why Boston Lakes, for example, at Firebrand UK, there are lots of freaks and geeks that are walking around, and I love all of them. Okay, they are the people that we deliver most of our courses to, and of course they're the future IT technicians and security consultants and cybersecurity apprentices and so on and so forth. So they're all great, all great. And when you listen to them talking, you can understand exactly what they're talking about. So you can imagine what lunchtime is within one of the training centers. But imagine one of the waitresses or one of the chefs that's overhearing the conversation between these freaks and geeks as they're talking about all kinds of things in the developer world, all kinds of things in the IT infrastructure world, and things like that. DHCP and DNS and DNSSEC and CIA and defense in depth, and all of these great things are thrown around, almost like that's common parlance. That's a new language, invariably, is what they're talking about. They love ones and zeros, these people. Sales users hate computers, and they hate ones and zeros, and they hate all of this jargon. A computer is just a tool to them in order to bring up their spreadsheet, to sell, to keep the business going. A sales user is a very important asset to your organization, as invariably are all of your users on our networks. And those are the people that we need to keep trained and entertained and safe and secure in order to make the business tick. So even though they don't speak the jargon of us, okay, they don't know the ins and outs of a computer. They don't need to know the ins and outs of a computer. What they need to know is the ins and outs of a spreadsheet and how to pick up a phone and sell your product to somebody. That's what keeps our businesses running, invariably, if that's obviously your line of business. Obviously, if you're a government organization, then things are subtly different. So the people at the front end that are doing whatever it is that they're doing, the doctors, the nurses, the clinical staff, for example, if you work within in that sector, or within our police forces, for example, the people on the ground, our detectives, the people that are out there solving crime and doing all that great work. These are the people that we need to be supporting. Okay, they hate that jargon. Trust me, I work with these people. They do not like ones and zeros, and they don't like us invariably talking about this. It will be an instant off. It's like a light switch to people. So yes, you can layer a certain amount of this into place now, because being a geek or a nerd is becoming trendy. So they do like a little bit of the phishing terminologies. They do like to leave a session with a new term, maybe a different type of attack or a different type of virus or a different type of malware that's taking place, for example. So you can invariably put that into place, but only if it's going to be relevant and there's a purpose in the reason why you're talking about those kind of things to that kind of depth. If, of course, you're talking to a more technical audience and the people aren't going to understand that language, then fill your boots, okay? Knock yourself out and have a great time with it, okay? Do not give them anything that's not relevant to your organization or to what they need to know in order to conduct their business. Okay, it's almost like the need to know and hold, isn't it? Okay, only give them the information and the depth of the knowledge in which they need to empower them to do great work and keep your networks safe and secure and your organization safe and secure. How many of us have been watching our respective governments giving facts and figures and graphs and R numbers and things like that. And how many of us thought that was brilliant in the first week and have now flicked over to home bargain, what's it called? The Chase or Tipping Point or some other program on a different channel as soon as the government spokesmen start getting graphs up. And how many of us have only found it entertaining because they don't have a clicker and they have to get somebody else to say, next slide, please. I think for Christmas, invariably, what we need to do is get the chief medical officer one of those remote control things so that he can move his own slides over. And what we've done is now we've started to get tired of facts and figures and numbers and things like that. It makes the news. Okay, everyone goes, oh, that's terrible, that's terrible. But here we're now talking about a whole load of stats, which, to be honest with you, to the general public, can be misinterpreted and generally are misinterpreted and don't actually mean anything. So too many facts and figures that are not relevant, once again, is going to turn your audience off. And so only keep it invariably to the bare minimum that you need in order to deliver whatever messages it is that you need to get across. Because as soon as you start putting pie charts and graphs and stats and things like that on a slide, they're generally not going to be too interested in it, okay? Unless it has an impact, unless there is a reason of why you are using those stats. Now, I do use stats. Of course we do, because I am an analyst at heart, I suppose, really. So there's nothing I like better than a good spreadsheet, but spreadsheets don't rule my life, okay? I do not let spreadsheets rule my life. And I always, hopefully, from the analytical side of things, always look at things with a little bit more outside of the box, okay, with a little bit more sort of what does this actually mean to me and how am I going to interpret this? And these are the kind of questions, if you're asking yourself these questions, these are the kind of questions that your audience, that your users are also going to be asking. So a good idea is, if you are going to use these stats and figures, present them and then present them in a way that actually answers the questions that you had. So your audience, now you start to get those nods from the audience thinking, all right, okay, I can now see the purpose of this chart. I can now see the purpose of what these stats actually mean to me. That's when you know that you've delivered a stat or some kind of fact or figure properly, rather than people just glazing over and thinking, well, what colors has he used on that pie chart? Okay, you've lost them at that point. Okay, try not to use a single type of media or delivery. Now, again, here I am talking to you by the power of what we're using today. Today we're using Zoom. So by the power of using some kind of online meeting space, and I am next through PowerPoint slides. Now, for those of you that I have had the pleasure of delivering training to will know that Phil is not a next on PowerPoint slides kind of dude. Okay, I find it very tedious when I'm in with an audience in a classroom where the instructor is just effectively sat on his backside and going next through PowerPoint slides. I much prefer somebody who's a more dynamic. Maybe they're up and they're chatting and they're getting responses and things like that. But also, I like to use a whiteboard. I like to tell stories and draw pictures, and I like nothing better than to demonstrate things. So actually give you some demonstrations and make things a little bit more interactive, put some labs into things and make it real for the audience. Okay, and those are the kind of things that I'm talking about here, where you should try to avoid just using one type of media for the delivery. Invariably, people like a little bit of a video or a little bit of entertainment, I suppose, really, in their sessions. And again, I'll talk to you a little bit more about this after we've had our next cup of tea. Okay, and again, I've always mentioned the fact that invariably what you try to avoid here is emailing the information out to people, because that's just going to go into the bin. Okay, that would be, it may be useful to enforce something that you've already put into place, but if that's a single way that you're going to get your user training and awareness out to your end users, I can tell you here and now, quite with 100% success, is that that's a very ineffective way of delivering user training and awareness. Okay, don't email them. Okay, or online posts as well, because again, these days, of course, we're all using Teams or other platforms which have got lots of bulletin boards and lots of ways of getting messages out. It's not getting read. It's not getting read. People are far too busy, okay, and far too concerned, of course, with the stuff that's going on around them at this moment in time to take the time and trouble to read that. Okay, and Also, of course, frequency is important to you. So if it's once a week, I'd probably suggest that that's too frequent. But there's no right and wrong here about how frequent and how regular something is. Okay, so there's no right answer to this, unfortunately. But if it's too often, it will become fairly ineffective fairly quickly, unfortunately. So again, something to try to avoid is what we're talking about here. A couple of key points in here. Now, nobody knows everything. Okay, so again, one thing that I love to speak about on a Sunday night, I haven't done this for a little while, admittedly, because I've not been at Why Boston Lakes stood in front of physical people. I could do with a physical hug, actually. My wife is now all hugged out. Bless her. Well, she isn't, of course, because she's not made out of wood. But there's nothing I like better than actually being physically in a classroom with a whole bunch of people who you then get to know through, of course, from the Firebrand experience. For those of you that have been training with us will know that we eat together, we dance together, we are together for the whole hours and days and weeks invariably that we're training together. So we get to know each other quite nicely, and I love that. Okay, I like people. Generally, what I do on a Sunday night, however, because people look at you and think, right, okay, Phil Chapman, he is an instructor for Firebrand, so he must know his stuff. Okay, and I'd like to think, yes, for whatever course it is that I'm delivering, whatever the topic is that I'm talking about, I'm stood up with a degree of confidence in the fact that I know my stuff. Okay, that's because I've been trained. That's because I'm certified. That's because, most importantly, I have the experience and hopefully a little bit of depth of knowledge in the stuff that I'm talking about. But the question I always ask, or generally ask on a Sunday night, is right, hands up, who knows everything about IT, or who knows everything about security or data protection? And I'm hoping that no hands go up. And included in the no hands going up is my hand that doesn't go up either, because there is no way on God's good earth that you are going to know everything about everything. It's just not possible. I am constantly amazed at how much I get back from a delivery that I give, whether that be online or effectively within a classroom. I always learn something new from either discussions that we have at dinner, through at breakfast, obviously from a Firebrand point of view, or when somebody interjects in a class and they then give us a little bit of their world experience or their life experience. There's always little snippets of information I take away from that. I said, well, I never actually knew that, which means that then it sparks my imagination. I do a little bit of research into the technology or the technique, whatever they have done. And so the next time I deliver something, I'm now a little bit wiser. And every single day, we all get a little bit wiser. Okay, so you are never going to be 100% on top of the subject. Okay, it's never going to happen, but you should be competent. Okay, so training is a different thing. Okay, so if you're trained, that means you've undergone some kind of formal certification path or some kind of formal training. It doesn't necessarily mean to say that you're going to end up competent in it, but it may mean that you are certified in it. Okay, competency invariably comes as a combination between experience, training, and again, I suppose really knowledge that you gain outside of the training environment as well. Okay, and again, it's also something to be aware of, the fact that you don't necessarily need to be checking somebody's credentials to make sure that they're competent to be talking with some degree of accuracy about what you are delivering. But make sure that what you do deliver, you do know, okay, and that you're kind of accurate about. But also be humbled by the fact that you don't know everything, because there will be stuff invariably that your audience have heard of, and it might be a technology, it might be a terminology, it might be something that they've read or researched themselves, that you will need to fess up and say, well, actually, I don't know the answer to that. Okay, and invariably, you know, the more honest you are with your audience, the better you will be. If you feel that there is an area that would be interesting to your users, which is outside of your remit, outside of the scope or your jurisdiction, call in somebody who knows their stuff. Okay, now this might be a commercial enterprise. The downside with that is that invariably they are going to cost you, they're going to charge you for their time, effort, and expertise. And at the end of the day, sometimes you may actually find, well, do you know what? I've called these people in and I can't possibly could have done it myself, based on what it is they've done for me. So check their credentials, check to make sure that they have got the experience and the depth of knowledge before you employ these people. Better still, use your local resources. Okay, so here in the UK, again, I'm a big advocate for these groups of individuals who are experienced, talented police officers. They all come from some form of law enforcement background. So if it's that impact message that you want to get across to them, seek out your local cyber protect team. Now, every single region within England and Wales, up into Police Scotland and over into the Police Service Northern Ireland, has their own dedicated cybercrime unit. And within that field as well, there's also a protect unit, a cyber protect unit, who will do just that for you. Okay, now these are gifted police officers. They've got the depth of experience because they all come from a law enforcement background. They're very good on their feet. They are not necessarily technical geeks and freaks like me. Not necessarily. Some of them are invariably very, very gifted, but they are all very well trained and well maintained and very, very good at getting impact messages across to your users. And the best news of this, of course, is that they will come across, and at sort of approved times, they're a resource which is freely available to you and widely available to you as well. So if you've never hooked into these organizations, seek them out and have a little look at them. And again, I'm talking, again, I apologize to my European friends about what's happening over in the UK, because I work with these people. I've trained alongside a lot of these people as well, so I know them reasonably well. But I also know, because I keep an eye on it from the French side of things, that exactly the same situation takes place over here in France. And I also know that the Dutch and the Belgians do it as well. And I'm assuming, of course, that our German friends do that as well. I'm hoping that I'm not missing out any nationalities on the list. I can't actually see everybody at this moment in time. But I can almost guarantee that if you to reach out to your local cyber protect unit, regardless of your nationality or your geographical location, there'll be somebody there who will be equipped and designed to help you. So these are a great resource. And even if you just use their online resources, which again are widely available to you, have a little look and see what they can do. Okay. And again, this is where we are very much joined up together. So, and again, a big thanks to my friends down in Devon and Cornwall, who are lovely people as well, but they're proper people as well. So at the end of the day, these people can come and stand in front of your users and instantly connect with your users. Okay, because if nothing else, police officers are very, very good people. If that's an actual term. Okay, so they have a depth of experience in dealing with all kinds of different people. And we all watch these fly on the wall documentaries, don't we, about how the police conduct themselves. I probably have to admit, when you watch police interceptors over here in the UK, those people that chase criminals in cars and things like that, they're probably a lot more polite and reserved because there's a TV camera in their face than they probably would be with some of the reprobates that they actually stop at the side of the road. But that aside, what it gives them is a degree of experience in dealing with a whole wide range of people in all kinds of walks in life. And of course, all kinds of different industries and organizations can reach out to them. And so again, I'm a big thank you to my friends down in the southwest of the UK for this. This is a great example of the kind of things that these people can do for you and what these organizations can do for you. So again, a whole load of stuff in here, and definitely find them out. Okay, seek them out and use them. Also, of course, these people are very, very up to date with the current threats, the current climate, especially from a criminal point of view, of course. And this can have a great impact. In fact, if you get somebody from one of these organizations in as part of your training, a user and training session, they'd love to hear from you. I'm absolutely certain. So use and abuse them. Don't abuse them, but use them. Alongside this then, so just got kind of quickly round up this little section in here. Just remember to know your audience. Okay, so know to whom you're pitching this to. I'm going to layer in, so I'm going to stop for a cup of tea in a little bit. I'm going to put a bit more depth and detail into this when we come back after we've had a little bit of a refresh. Okay, so as I've just mentioned, use these resources. Again, I'm picking on my cyber protect teams. Hopefully they're not cringing too much now. I'm hoping that the phones are now exploding behind them as people are now calling them. But there are other government sites and again, vendor sites. And again, I'll layer this in a little bit when we come back after tea break about how to use these more effectively. Think about what's happening at this moment in time within your organization, within your industry, from the threat point of view, and think about the near future. So this takes us back to the first little session that we had before the first tea break. Start thinking about event horizon, so planning what's been implemented. Is there going to be any major changes that we can see? Are we going to be moving from WebEx onto Teams? Are we going to be using a new VPN? Do my users need to be aware of its existence? Do I need to get some training in place for them for this new technology coming into place? But underneath all of that, do I need to get an effective awareness campaign out so that not only are my users trained, they're also aware of the implications of what this training is all about and what these moves are that we're training them to? Again, a big one here is things like moving up into the cloud and things like this. Users don't understand the cloud. Why should they understand where their data is and how they're getting access to this software and things like this? So a little bit of empowerment to your users will go a long way in for them having an understanding and acknowledgement about the different concerns that you may have about things such as data protection. Okay, try and make it as fun as interactive as you possibly can. Again, I'll talk to you about this. So gamification. Okay, having some hands-on stuff coming through, and again, I'm hoping that my Protect officers are looking at my efforts here to getting some Lego into play here as well. So, because I know that some of the cybercrime units, some of the cyber protect units, have got a particularly great way of using Lego models and a series of programs and a card game that they play that gets you actively involved in the protect side of things, and there's all kinds of different things and techniques that they can use for this as well. It's a totally awesome thing that they do. And again, this is something that with a little bit of imagination you could possibly also bring in-house yourself. Using demos, as I've said, mixing matching your media a little bit here will go a long way. And so one of the things that I generally do is I bring out a Wi-Fi pineapple and I will just sniff the network, and as people are coming in, there may be a big sign up saying Phil is doing a demo on wireless at this moment in time, just to caveat it, just to give me that ethical feel behind it. And then I just capture everybody's mobile phone as they come within the vicinity of my Wi-Fi pineapple. And then at some point, I will layer in the fact of, do you understand how insecure your mobile phones are, or your tablets or your laptops, by using free public Wi-Fi, for example? And then I'll just very quickly put up the capture that I've got from the pineapple that flicks over onto a different screen, and then people can then start to spot their own phones in the list. And there's no better impact than all of a sudden people thinking, crikey, that's me, very vulnerable. And even people that think that, do you know what, that you never catch my phone on that device, I have surprised them in the past by actually having their phone in the device which they thought was protected. So again, a great simple demonstrations that take place. And there is also software that allows you to mount a little phishing campaign, so you can actually then see how many of your users in the audience have actually responded to a phishing email that comes through. So these resources, that resource in particular, you generally have to pay for that. There's a program that does that as part of your defense strategy, but some of these organizations actually sort of let you try before you buy as well. So resource it, because you may actually find that you can use 1 or 2 attempts at this before your training and awareness sessions, and you can actually implement those as part of the session itself. So it's a great way of using your imagination and leaving a real impact to your users. Again, I'll talk to you more about this after we've had a tea break. I've kind of mentioned the fact that users like something in return for their attendance. So again, make the presentation relevant to them and give them a little snippet, I suppose, really, of how they can protect their own home network. So talk about defending their own wireless access points, for example, changing passphrases and security settings on their home routers and things like that. Maybe show them how to do that as well. So it's a 2-minute job, isn't it? To do just that, and maybe give them some simple guides, some simple handouts and things like that they can take away. People like to have something at the end of these kind of sessions. I'll talk to you again about the testing side of things, but there's nothing better than at the start of a presentation to say, and there will be an assessment, or we're going to have a little test at the end to focus people. So Phil is going to talk to you for 3 hours. Some of you have probably got your feet on the desk now, drifted off a little bit. You've got your Monster Munch and your Iron Brew or your Dr. Pepper on the desk and you're kind of floating in and out of what Phil's saying. But if Phil had said, right, okay, folks, there's going to be, we're going to have a test at the end of this, invariably you would be sat on the edge of your sheet now with a pen and paper and noting every word that Phil has said. Of course, that's such a nonsense, but it does focus people. Okay, especially if it's going to be something that's part of a mandated system. So you've got to get over 60% to say that you've successfully conducted the security awareness session for the year, that kind of thing. Try and make it as dynamic as an interactive visual. I know people are people, of course, so you have your own ways of delivering things. And I'll talk to you a little bit about this in the final session. So we'll kind of round things off a little bit into the final session as well. And right at the very end, without being too heavy-handed here, make it mandatory. Okay, so people know that they have to do this without it having to be a chore, whether that be an annual chore. Okay, and again, all that needs to be is just a simple sign-off sheet. So an attendance register could be an online thing that you do. And as I said, if you actually layer in a some kind of test, for example, then they have to do this online, and the results are then recorded and stored perhaps over in the HR department. So that also then acts as a checklist so that you know that your users have attended your session. Again, I'll give you some more ideas about this once we've had a quick cup of tea. So I think, Phoebe, that's worked in quite nicely with tea break number 2. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So we'll take a quick break, go and stretch your legs, grab a cup of tea, get some fresh air if it's fresh enough for you wherever you are. And then when we come back, hopefully I'll just give you a couple of ideas on how to make that an effective session. Happy with that, Phoebe? I can't hear you. I don't know if anybody else can, but.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, yeah. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully suitably refreshed for the last little part of the sprint. We're on the home stretch. Terrible. And so what we're going to deal now with is going to just sort of layer in over the top of the last couple of slides from the previous section here about user awareness sessions. Now, I've been a trainer for quite a few years, in fact, so I'm quite, I suppose, used to standing up in front of people and talking. Too much, my wife tells me. Prior to that, I was, in fact, I trained in the military as well. So I did this for 5 years in the military as well, off and on, but constantly kind of involved, I suppose, really in intelligence briefings and meetings and things like that. And whether the audience was live or invariably dotted around the world in a lot of cases. So these WebEx things are not really new technologies to a lot of us probably. So I'm quite used to, I suppose, the sound of my own voice, and I'm also used to standing up in front of people and delivering training sessions. Now that's come with experience. I can remember going through a whole load of training from my military days. So I suppose really I was trained in how to deliver a course and how to teach people and all that kind of stuff. So I've done all of that, but there's no that doesn't really prepare you for the experience of actually standing up and seeing people looking at you. And still to this day, I do a whole load of conference. Well, not at this moment in time, of course, because everything's virtual. But it's not unusual for me to go to and attend conferences and things like that. Stand behind a dais and look out at a sea of people and get nervous. That happens because at the end of the day, we're all people. Okay, and so some people don't have those kind of those nerves, I suppose, really. But I always kind of channel that, I suppose, really into the fact that if you don't get nervous, then you can be a little bit complacent about it. And having some useful nerves and butterflies before you make a presentation is not a bad thing. The thing that makes me less nervous, or in fact a little bit more confident in my ability to deliver something, is when I know that I'm well prepared for it. And again, this doesn't always happen, of course, because technology is technology, so things do go wrong. But even when things go wrong, I suppose really I have a business continuity plan. See where I went with that? In the fact that if that doesn't work, then I can always try something else. And I think what makes a good session is the fact that it's relatively seamless, unless, of course, there's some kind of disastrous outage, which means that you just have no electricity or all of a sudden the internet stops and things like that. Then ultimately those are things that are outside of your control. But if it is something that you can control, then control it. Okay, and the way that you're going to do that is get some prior preparation into place. Now, I'm not going to the 6Ps. If you know what the 6Ps means, then fantastic. Again, I think it's probably possibly an old military or police thing in there, but it's all about prior preparation and prevention and all that kind of stuff. So make sure that you're comfortable with your surroundings. And again, this happens. You're always a little bit on the back foot if all of a sudden you're in a different classroom, or if you're in a different briefing room, or you go into an environment that's unfamiliar with you. And probably my protect friends out there, my police friends, will kind of aligned a little bit in the fact that they'll turn up at an organization they've never been in before and meet somebody who they've never met personally before. So they're constantly kind of thinking, right, this is all new. This is not new to me. They'll set up their laptop or whatever it is they're delivering from. And you have to have a couple of minutes just to familiarize yourself with where you're at and where are the PowerPoints, the sockets and things like that. So if you are able to make yourself comfortable within your environment, then do that. Okay, even if it means that you turn up a little bit early, if you're doing this in an external site, for example, or somewhere that you're not familiar with, make sure that you're comfortable and that you've got everything that you need. Okay, and again, that also then obviously works on the fact that make sure that the equipment that you have is suitable for whatever it is that you're trying to deliver. And you may also think, well, I need to have some backups here as well. I always I never travel light when it comes to delivering things, because I've always got a fistful of cables and connectors for any kind of environment that I'm going into. If I've got something that's wireless, I'll invariably have a wired one as well. So I like to use a wireless mouse, for example. Some of the technology uses a wireless keyboard, but I always kind of have tucked away somewhere a good old wired mouse and a wired keyboard, just in case a USB device I need to do that as well. So again, that's not a bad idea, but of course it just adds to your luggage. And then if you're comfortable, make sure that your audience are comfortable as well. So there's nothing worse than watching people shifting around or complaining about the air conditioning is too cold or too hot, he says with a big smile on his face, because invariably most of my time not most of my time, but a lot of my time at Y Boston is what I call air conditioning tennis, where it's too cold for some people and too warm for others, and then too warm for others and too cold for others. And so it goes on all day long. And invariably, once you get that set, it's Thursday afternoon and you're saying goodbye to everybody. And so make sure, okay, that everybody is comfortable, and sort of check to make sure that everybody is happy and smiley as you go through it. When it comes to the actual delivery of things, invariably trying to keep it simple, stupid is the best way to do it. Especially, again, PowerPoint is a great medium, or any other kind of display that you're using, whether it's flip chart or whiteboard, doesn't make any difference. But again, he says with a big smile on his face, try not to overcomplicate things unless it's going to have an impact. So, for example, if you've got the dodgiest PowerPoint slide on the planet, there's maybe got a brontosaurus on one side and a robot on the other, make sure that there's a message that you're trying to get when you're using crazy graphics such as that. Okay, so if somebody's going to take that away, okay, what they don't want to do is over dinner that night say, oh yeah, we had this presentation today, and the idiot instructor had there was a slide on, had a brontosaurus on one side and had a robot on the other side. And when the people that didn't say, yeah, but so what was he delivering? Say, well, I don't really know, but there was a brontosaurus on it and there was a robot and it was hilarious. And you think, well, you've lost that then. So there was no point in having that kind of graphic when you didn't want them to take away how technology has changed over the years, for example. And so if you're going to use different types of media, video, any forms of graphics and things like that, obviously make sure that works as well, because there's nothing worse than trying to click to VT and it doesn't go through the projector, for example, or you can't hear the sound, or people at the back can't hear the sound and things like that. So you then have to juggle things around a little bit. When it comes to controlling the room, well, that's something that's invariably just built into people that are very, very good at briefing and things like that. Again, you don't need to be, when it says control the room here, you don't need to be too heavy-fisted with people. You don't need to necessarily control the people, because they can control themselves. But invariably, the conditions that you can put into place is instill a little bit of discipline, I suppose, in people, so that they're not on the phones, they're not talking to each other, they are trying to pay attention to you as best as they possibly can. And a good way of doing that is to make sure that you are actively engaged with the audience as well. So always, always, always allow for audience participation. If somebody's got something to say, make sure that you factored in a little bit of time within your presentation for somebody to say stuff. Okay, now again, but then you need to go back into the controlling environment, because if somebody's going off on one and they're talking about something that's no longer relevant, then you need to very subtly bring them either back into line with what the conversation is, or humor them in some aspect, and then move on to the next onto the next subject, without allowing it to sort of run out of control into little side conversations that then burst into place as well. And I've seen this done effectively, obviously, by some of my colleagues are very, very good at this from a training point of view. And I've also unfortunately seen it done in other environments where people have given too much of a free rein to the audience, and there's been too many chats and things like that. If you allow an audience to chat too much, then invariably it becomes just one big melee of noise in front of you, and you've kind of lost control of them. Okay, bringing it back to what we were talking about before. Okay, if you have got the credentials, and if you have got the clout of being the expert in the field that you are talking about, let people know about that. Okay, so that again, expert is not a word that I kind of like to use very often, because no one's really an expert. Nobody knows everything, remember, but be humble about that. But make sure that people know that you're the right person to be sat in front of them, rather than somebody, oh yeah, I was just told to be here, that kind of thing. And if you're not the right person to be delivering this, get somebody who is. Okay, so resource whoever it is that needs to do this. Okay, and then start by painting a picture. The best deliveries are invariably the ones that tell a story at some point. So start talking about things like the current threat picture, what's actually happening in the world, and what's likely to happen and change over time. Now, this might be, as we're talking about cybersecurity here, a great way of dealing with this, it would be things like social engineering techniques and things like that. Now, this is where you may then have to layer in and invariably empower your audience with them using some new terminology. So it may be phishing terms or social engineering terms or malware, and what is ransomware and things like this. All these things that they would have invariably heard on the news and TV, or maybe heard sort of in general kind of conversations. But don't assume that your users understand what these terms are. So but make sure that you do. Okay, so at the end of the day, if you're talking about malware, for example, make sure that you know the fundamental differences between a worm, a virus, and a Trojan, for example. Make sure that you know what malware is and the different forms of social engineering that are relevant to your organization and relevant to the world as we live at this moment in time. Okay, so here we're kind of talking about the general observance of the threat picture, I suppose, really, which is relevant to your end users. And then bring that down a little bit into the technical way, the technical threats that are out there. So things like network threats, for example, and this again could go into the application side of things as well. So especially with mobile uses at this moment in time. So Wi-Fi security, using the internet, and again, the password security and things like that, and the policies that surround all of that. Now, in the graphic, in fact, you can see quite unashamedly, in fact, there are a couple of graphics that I use on some of the deliveries that I do with my Protect teams and some of the defense teams that I've made here. So I'm a big fan of a very simple device, in fact, which is a Wi-Fi Pineapple, and it's great from a Protect point of view. There's several different things you can do with it. And in the right hands, from a Protect point of view, from a defense point of view, it's a great tool to use. From a security point of view as well, it's not also quite a good thing to use from a monitoring position on your network. The unfortunate thing is that while I give you one hand for evil intent, and these are available to you on the open market, of course. So I think probably about 150 euros, something like that, on Amazon. They're about $100 direct from the US if you get them from the Hack5 site. There's a new one out, in fact, which I've got coming for Christmas, which I'll be playing around with over here in France. You'll be pleased to hear, so nowhere near your networks. It's a great device, of course, for criminal intent as well. And so what you can actually demonstrate quite effectively, in fact, in front of your audience. You can also have the impact on the fact, well, this could be happening in a Costa Coffee, in a Starbucks, in a airport lounge, in a railway station near you. And the two images you can see here are, in fact, this is my own handiwork. One is the Costa Coffee, which is pretty much 200 yards outside of Boston Lakes in Bedfordshire, and the other one is Stansted Airport. All of those users are on their mobile devices. And in fact, that was my record. In fact, Stansted Airport, where I had 127 devices all connected at the same time. The dude that you can see there is, I call him my Costa geek, was somebody who I observed with 2 laptops. He was gaming, in fact, in using Costa's Wi-Fi. He actually had these devices plugged into the sockets in the coffee shop, and it was only I knew he was gaming because I actually took a look at his screen as I was getting my coffee. But what I would have loved to have seen would have been the manager of the coffee shop just going over and putting in a question or two about what was he actually doing on the network and what was happening on his laptop, because that's unusual behavior, I would suggest, in a coffee shop. It's not unusual to see somebody with a laptop or a mobile phone out, of course, but equal amount of damage could be done by somebody sniffing a public Wi-Fi network. And with the amount of firepower that he had actually on his table, and no coffee, I have to say, so he wasn't a paying customer, it just piqued my interest a little bit. He's the kind of people that we should be looking out for, and you should invariably, in the back of your mind, you could be using as an example of people to avoid in public. Nothing against the person, of course, but what he's doing technically could have been nefarious. Now, he wasn't, of course, I advocate that, but he could well have been. And so making your users aware of these threats also then comes down into the personal and the physical security side of things as well. So from a cybersecurity point of view as well, we have to step outside of the technology and look at the bigger picture as well. And of course, this is when we can really ram it home with our users by talking about things like the physical social engineering, usage of social media, and people posting things, either inappropriate things or things that may be seen as company confidential or classified out on social media. So very easy to do. And again, it might not necessarily be something they type. It might be a photograph of something that they take, for example. We are all in a changed environment. We're all now probably doing more on social media now than we ever have done through the ages, absolutely through the ages. I think jokingly on my last sprint, I spoke about my daughter who spent the summer with us here in pretty much in lockdown. She was from uni in Exeter, and she got me involved in TikTok. For about 15 minutes of my life, I had the TikTok app on my phone, and she taught me some crazy move. And I thought, you know what? Crazy moves are not Phil, and TikTok is not Phil, and so it was on and off. However, I'm a big fan of things like Facebook, which apparently is like for old people now, Dad, and also obviously LinkedIn and all of these social media platforms invariably, which are a great platform to meet with friends, to see what's happening in the community, to invariably do some research and put the feelers out within the business environment, which is what LinkedIn is, like Facebook for grown-ups, isn't it? The downside to that is, of course, that you are laying yourself out a little bit, okay, in a public environment, and you need to be aware, everyone needs to be aware of the types of things that are taking place and what invariably can be gained from those platforms. Now, again, I train open source intelligence and the analysis of that as well. So know firsthand how much information can actually be gathered. So this is data protection that we're looking at here. And invariably, sometimes the data that you think that you're protecting, you are not by using social media. You take a risk with that every time. The other risk that we take from telecommunicating is that we are now also making our users work more and more and more away from the safety of the office. Now, again, you could possibly see the graphic that I'm using here is a laptop that's open on a phone with a mobile device next to it. And how many times have you been on a train or an airplane, sat next to or in the vicinity of somewhere where you can actually see the screen and possibly actually see the contents of an email or a spreadsheet or a document that they're working on? These are busy people that are traveling into the cities and things like that. And that time, of course, spent on a train is time that they are in the office as well. Now, the connection that they're making over the wireless is using a VPN, is being encrypted. So the data that's moving from your data center to their device is being encrypted as best as it possibly can as it moves across the airwaves. As soon as it gets to the user's desktop, however, it is not encrypted. It's in human readable form, which means that any human that's within the vicinity of that laptop can do some shoulder surfing and have a look and see what's exactly happening here. And there are countless number of times that I've witnessed this firsthand, but mostly on trains, I have to say, but also on aircraft as well, where people on airplanes should know better, really, because you cannot help but sit on someone's lap if you're flying with Ryanair, for example, and you can see exactly what's taking place. And more importantly as well, I can also see what's being typed, such as usernames and passwords as well. So to a trained eye, this is a very dangerous time for your users who are accessing your data and using your equipment. And so all of those security implications that you put into place now fall by the wayside because they're not protecting themselves out there. Okay. A little bit of awareness, however, may mean the fact that they might actually use a little screen guard or not use it in an open forum and not use open Wi-Fi because they now have an understanding of the fact that that's a dangerous environment for them to be working on, or just be aware of the fact that people that are moving around that could potentially see their screen. Okay, you could ask no more than the user do that. Okay, you might not necessarily get them to change their working habits, but you may make them more aware of their environment and the surrounding environment that they're working in, because sometimes they're just focused on that spreadsheet and they don't realize that somebody else is photographing it through the gaps in the seats in between the trains, and that person would invariably be Phil Chapman, because that's what I do, not as a living, admittedly, but I have done that before. So it's a big issue, is this one. And of course, we are all in that environment at this moment in time. So if I go back to my original statement, there's probably no better time for us to be thinking about protecting our users from themselves, invariably, when they're working remotely. Now, admittedly, not all of them are on trains at the moment, and not all of them are sitting in coffee shops doing their work. They're all safely tucked up at home, hopefully. But that just extends it out, of course, into their immediate family. Just by virtue of the fact that you're related to somebody doesn't mean to say that they should have access to the data that's on the inside of your network. So imagine that on a lot of organizations. So you may be a government organization, you might be a health, you might be financial organizations and things like that. All of that data is protected and protected for a purpose. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily extend to your family and members of your family who can also then see exactly what it is that you're working on. Okay, so again, that's a condition that should be put into place, and that should be part of a policy that you have in place. Okay. If we then think about the way that criminal activity has now morphed, for want of a better term, as I mentioned before, no change at all in really what a criminal wants from you, to hurt you, to financially hurt you, okay, to gain some kind of footing in any way, shape, or form against you. So we're still talking about traditional kinds of crime with fraud and extortion, cyberbullying. So there we've slapped the word cyber in front of bullying, which is horrific these days. It probably puts bullying into a completely different world for the victims of this crime. Data theft, of course, and then we put into child protection and all kinds of things that are, pure evil that have been taking place over hundreds of years, have really now just forced the criminals to be able to have a platform, which in some cases, of course, is also an anonymous platform where they can actually solicit all of these things online and invariably believe that they're not being tracked or traced. And again, for impact here, don't scare your audience, okay, into this. Get your cyber protector unit in, let them scare your audience, because they do it in a nice kind of soft nature way of doing things, but also then use the resources that you have around you. And here's a great one, which is Action Fraud here in the UK. And again, these are snippets. Invariably, I took these yesterday. So I updated the slide yesterday. Phoebe will be pulling her hair out now thinking, oh, Phil's edited the slides. So these are kind of big scams that are taking place here in the UK at this moment in time. And I know firsthand, I've not looked at the Dutch or the Belgian or the German ones, but I know firsthand here in France that exactly the same scams are taking place here over here in France. So I'm kind of I'm aware of the fact that will be happening pretty much across Europe and pretty much across the world, in fact. So outside of Europe, of course, on a global footing, these are exactly the same types of things that are taking place. Where do you get this information from? It's from the reliable source. Do not get this third party from the BBC or from network news, okay? Because what journalists do is they take facts and figures and they then get it into their own speak or into their own form of words, and they turn it into something that makes you stop for 5 minutes and watch a TV program, okay? Go to the horse's mouth is what I'm suggesting here, and go to the people that are positioned properly to be looking after us, okay? And that's what these people do. So So again, across Europe, I apologize if there is somebody from non-Europe on the call, but this is a global thing that we are looking at here. And these agencies are generally hooked up and are interlinked, share data, they share best practices, they do a whole load of stuff in here. So again, I've kind of picked on the European ones here, but the National Cybersecurity Centre is one of my favorites because it's a UK one. It's a very, very great site as well. So even outside of the UK, have a little look at that. But all of these, the Germans, the Dutch, the Belgians and the French, all have super fantastic sites, and invariably half an hour to an hour spent looking at these resources will go a long way. So if you do nothing else based on the end of this little program, if you've not seen any of these before, it just makes Phil smile, okay, and get up onto your local site and have a look at the resources that are available to you, okay. And they're super cool. Okay, a lot of resources, and remember that their job ultimately here is to give you the facts and figures and to protect us. Okay, and again, this can be then translated into the different strategies that you put into place to maintain the protect side of things on your network as well. Now, again, I'm picking on the UK here, but I know full well that this also translates over into our friends in continental Europe and further afield as well, certainly into the Middle East. And some of the North African states as well that I've looked at as well. And here we have several strategies. Now, why am I using these? Well, these are government-based strategies which are set, I suppose, really from the experience of people that invariably know what they're doing. Okay, so I'm not talking about politicians here. I'm talking about people that actually work for a living. And so, again, I apologize if there are any politicians on the call, but that's what you got voted in for, a bit of Phil's abuse. But here we are now talking about the 4 Ps, which is what the UK calls contest, which is invariably, this is a CT thing. So this is a terrorism side of things. So counterterrorism is where this has come from, but has now been morphed into and adapted into the way that a lot of police strategies are also put into place as well. This is changing a little bit, I suppose, really, as it needs to. But you've heard me talk about prepare and protect through this. Okay, what we're not necessarily doing here is pursuing things. So we're not detectives that are going to be chasing after criminals, tracking them down and putting indoors and things like that. Some of you may be, in fact, so kudos. Also, you may be involved in the prevent side of things. So again, you could stretch your imagination to the prevent strategy in here, in preventing your users by doing the wrong thing. Okay, so so there is an element of this that we can also bring over into the corporate world. The UK government then has a national cybersecurity strategy. You can see 2016 to 21, which again, we love these kind of buzzwords, don't we? Defend, deter, and develop. It kind of makes sense, I suppose, as to what those words mean and how you can adapt and adopt that into your own internal strategy as well. So even though these are government strategies, have a look at them, okay? Because if for nothing else, they are resources which you could found a decent policy on. And that's what these policies are. This is what these strategies are absolutely superb cyber strategies, especially obviously the national cybersecurity strategy is just that. But it will may even just sort of light your imagination as to how you could layer this in to a user training and awareness session. Okay, outside of government circles, and I'll probably outside of the UK side of things as well, remember that you've also got a whole load of vendors that are well placed to invariably give you a whole load of resources. Now, I caveat this with the fact that these good people want to sell you a product. So if you flick over onto their websites, onto their resources, and again, I've chosen just a few here, obviously. So again, there are plenty of other great ones out there. I have no affiliation with these companies. Well, apart from Microsoft, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, but no real sort of bent, I suppose, really to them, other than the fact, of course, that what we tend to forget with organizations such as Microsoft and Cisco is that they have a huge presence in the world of IT, and especially out in cloud and internet-based resources as well. So these are the people that have the sensors out there that are gathering the stats, the facts and the figures about the different types of attacks, the methods that are being using, the different types of malware that have been implemented against their network devices or their operating systems, for example. And so these people know stuff. Okay, they've got the experience, they've got the expertise, and they create reports which are freely accessible to us, and we can sign up to their security reports on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Yes, it means that your inbox is going to be flooded with reports. Flooded is probably too bad a word to use with this. So you are going to be regularly updated with this. But yes, they are also going to send you mailers about latest products, and do you want to buy this, and have you considered Office 365 and the new Cisco router and so on and so forth. Antivirus providers, exactly the same people. Again, I picked on Sophos here because the Threatosaurus is a great one. It's a bit, there's a guy called Roger Melly who's got Profanosaurus, but that's something completely different. This is a great one, invariably, and would not be too bad a handout for a user training and awareness session in here, because it fills in a whole load of jargon and terminology about the different types of virus and worm and Trojan. What do all those things mean? And it puts it into it's like a little dictionary, like a thesaurus of words that your users may actually then do a little bit of research themselves. So it empowers them to do this. And the Sophos Threatosaurus is something that we generally give as a handout on some of our foundation courses. It's a bit old now, admittedly, but it still works. Okay, and again, I caveat this with the fact that I'm not affiliated with these organizations at all, other than I train with Microsoft, of course, and layer some of these protections into other stuff that I do, I suppose, really from a training point of view. But I know them to be great resources, okay, with the caveats in place. And along with that, we also then have a whole series of trusted sites. Now, again, I'll use the same caveat for this slide as I did with the other ones. I don't have any affiliation with any of these organizations. The BCI, in fact, I spoke to them before I put these slides together, because I used their logo and their Horizon plan on the first session, and I just got their grace, their authority to use that. So they're a great bunch of people, in fact, I have to say. So, and their resilience reports that they write are very good. They use a lot of stats, a lot of pie charts, a lot of facts and figures, which you have to cut through again. So you have to analyze it for your own needs. And these are really, really great. Okay. And again, I actually do sign up to most of these organizations in some way, shape, or form. And again, he says very much with tongue in cheek, other than BCI and Radware, I've also written articles for all of these magazines or online blogs and posts and things like that as well. So that we work with BAE Systems. In fact, the Firebrand support them as part of their cybersecurity strategy, for example, and other articles that I've written on behalf of Firebrand. Training as well has made their way into these different publications. And the key thing here is that, regardless of the fact that Phil Chapman's written stuff for this in a roundabout kind of way, is that it's a trusted site. So it's something that you have either used frequently, so you know that the facts and figures, and you know that invariably the articles are written by people that you either know or trust, or you can agree and accept. Okay, rather than just Googling stuff and seeing what the first hit is and then layering that into your presentation, because invariably what you may find is that you put some rubbish in place. Because I don't know if you've heard, folks, the internet is 80% rubbish, is what it is. Okay, other than, of course, singing and dancing dustmen and dogs on skateboards, which is invariably what the internet is all about, I fancy. Okay, so if you want to put a dog on a skateboard into a briefing, perfect. I have no issues with that whatsoever. But don't start getting into untrusted chat forums to find out what the latest threats are or what the latest malware is, and so on and so forth. Okay, so trusted sites all the way through. And invariably anybody, of course, that you have some kind of affiliation with as well. If it's a company or an organization that your company or organization works with, a vendor, a supplier, then they may also be a good resource for you. And that resource may also be a great resource for user training and awareness as well, remember, because they would love to get on the inside of your organization and start delivering their latest products as well, outside of the framework of security. Okay, so I do kind of caveat this with the fact there's always an issue with using vendors. So keep an open mind to it. Use all of your great analytical skills to the fore here and bring things together, okay, into a nice tidy package. But give credit where credit is credit's due, okay, to the organizations that may have helped you, because that also gives it credence to your presentation, of course. of course, get trained yourself. So if you're delivering this and you need to be certified and you need to be trained in it, then seek out the appropriate training yourself, because there's nothing better than actually knowing your subject, okay, and sort of being all over your subject and stood in front of people. And that's very, very good when it comes to enhancing your experience and understanding of it, okay. But then be wary of the fact, of course, that there's only one training provider that you're going to use, which is Firebrand Training, of course, who do it faster, slicker, better, higher, stronger. But also be mindful of the fact that certifications don't necessarily give you the depth of experience and the level of knowledge and understanding that you might need in order to present something, because they're two very, very different things. Okay, when we're dealing with this, you need to have other inherent skills invariably to get this message across. So it might be you're very, very good with graphic design, for example. So your poster campaign is awesome, super awesome. Not only do you get a great message out, you also get the impact in by using the right kind of colors and tones and things like that. You may be very, very good with video content. Super. Okay, get it in, get your experience in. You may be very good on your feet talking. You might be extremely good at doodling and drawing cartoons on a whiteboard and things like that. Get all of those skills in, okay? And invariably, all of us, as we go through the experience, I suppose, really of doing more and more briefings and developing ourselves as individuals, gain that depth of understanding and experience outside of the certification process. But of course, it has to be all within the concepts of something that you are comfortable and suitably trained and equipped to deliver. Okay, but experience counts for everything in all of these environments. And of course, that's not just for user training and awareness sessions. That's for pretty much everything that we do in life. When it comes to the content itself, keeping things real and up to date, focusing on the here and now. We've mentioned already before. So get a feel for what are the current threats in here, and how does that impact on our organization? Okay, know about invariably what's happening here and now, what's happening in the future as well. So if there's any future evolutions in the technology of your organization, make sure you're kind of abreast of those. Doesn't necessarily mean say you're going to deliver that within your speech or in your session at that point in time, but if you have knowledge of it, okay, the implication of that invariably would be something that you could deliver, so that when that new technology or when that new system is rolled out, your users are then aware of the fact, oh, right, okay, Bob spoke about this in his session last week. I now understand fully why this is now being rolled out. So two-factor authentication, for example, why are we moving up into the cloud? Why do my emails need to be digitally signed? Why is it blocking me from sending that attachment out on my email? All of a sudden, okay, that's not a IT is crap round here kind of solution. That's a, oh, right, okay, that's a data protection thing. Perhaps I need to think about who I'm sending this email to. That's what you need to get across to your people. Okay, that's what we need within our organization. Okay, keep it real. Okay, keep it as sexy as you possibly can, but don't come in like a boxer coming into a boxing match kind of thing with a silver dressing gown on and people dancing and all kinds of the eye of the tiger playing and things like that, because it's a bit naff. Okay, also make it real when you're deciding on the kind of the platforms you're going to use. And again, I've kind of put a couple of examples in here. And do I use it? Well, yeah, I probably do, to be honest. I'm guilty as charged in the fact of cyber criminals are people. Okay, they are generally the scroats of society as well, if I can use the word scroat on a Friday morning with people. They're criminals. Okay, we can turn them into heroes. We can turn them into people that have got issues. We can look at the defense of these individuals at some impact, but at the end of the day, they are criminals that want to rob you or hurt you or do something to your organization or do something to you as an individual. And at the end of the day, we need to vilify them and put them into the bracket of the fact that they are criminals. Okay, and they are people like you and I. Not that we are criminals on this call, hopefully, but they look like you and I. Okay, my police officer friends will probably look at the graphics that I've got in front of me and think, yeah, okay, these are the people that we're dealing with day in, day out. What we're not dealing with are the super sexy people that wear hoodies all day long and have these anonymous masks on and have got 1 and 0 wallpaper behind them on every photograph that they take. They've got some kind of real Gucci graphic digital stuff taking place. That's media that's doing this to us. Okay, so they don't hide around in the dark, in the shadows and things like that. They're walking around in coffee shops Okay, they're doing things in train stations and they are online, okay, probably sat in a vest and pants with an Xbox next to them, doing all kinds of serious damage to our networks. Okay, so try to avoid that. Okay, and again, I don't mind if you use a nice Gucci graphic behind you, Graham, when you're delivering your things, because that gives the impact of the fact that people know that you're not sitting in a warehouse. Okay, so there's also a bit of protect that we put it into place here, and the fact that people don't want to see what's going on behind you. So use the ones and zeros for effect from your, if you really want to gooch things up a little bit. But remember that when you're dealing with the threat are not these kind of super sexy individuals with hoodies and anonymous masks. They are people like the two characters you can see here on the screen. And of course, who are their victims? Well, they're people like you and I. Okay. And again, normally it would be lovely to have a show of hands about who's been a victim of some kind of cyber attack, whether it be at a commercial point of view or whether it be on an individual basis. We probably all have received some kind of phishing email. We've all probably possibly been on the receive of some kind of denial of service from an organizational point of view. It's taking place. The bigger your organization, probably the bigger the target you are, or some kind of phishing scam that's taken place through a text message, for example. Okay, or at this moment in time, you've seen all of these bogus tax and mandate frauds that are taking place out there. Again, within the past 6 months, I've probably personally seen 2 or 3 of them come my way, or certainly to my family members as well. Okay, luckily enough, I can spot them and I can deflect them because I've had a certain amount of user training and awareness. You want that level of knowledge to go into your users as well. So regardless of whether that's relevant to your users at an individual level, I would suggest it's relevant to all users in all businesses and all organizations, because the threat is real and persistent. Okay. And again, when we're talking about persistent threats here, we're not necessarily talking about the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Russians who are coming over and trying to infiltrate our networks and on a day-to-day kind of basis, even though that possibly is happening in some organizations and they need to be aware of that. Your users are not really at ground level too bothered by that fact. Okay, what they are bothered about are the phishing emails, or the social engineering attacks, or the frauds that are taking place here, which are relevant at their level. Okay, and again, if you can give them a little bit of a takeaway where they can take that away and protect their family with a little bit of that knowledge and empowering them to do that, brilliant. You've now delivered an effective training session. When it comes to the measure side of things, test always just gets the edge up a little bit, and it doesn't matter who you are. Again, if there's going to be a test, you're worried about is it in a test, Phil? There's generally the word yes is written on my whiteboard above me, and I just point to that. I don't even bother answering it now, because the whole reason why me talking is yes, it's in the test. Yes, it's even in the test. Even if I know it's not in the test, I still point at yes, it's in the test, because it's something that I want them to learn and take away from it. So again, this doesn't have to be something that's formal and rigid. People hate that, don't they? Okay, everyone hates a test. Well, you are a sad muppet if you love taking exams, I would suggest. But I suppose people like to challenge themselves, don't they? And that's fair enough, I suppose. But tests make you nervous. Tests put you on edge, and test is one of those kind of things. Here we go. But you can make it fun and interactive. It can actually be part of an ongoing process as you go through. So you can do little modularized. So what have we learned so far in this section, rather than have some kind of formal arrangement at the end of each session. And it could be interactive, so it could be question and answers, as simple as that. So it's audience participation. The downside to that is, of course, you get some techno geek in there that knows all the answers, and he or she then answers all the questions on behalf of everybody else, and everybody else sits back and just lets Alice answer all the questions, because she's the uber geek. But there are plenty of great free online resources available to you. So if you're using Socrative, for example, is one that we use at Firebrand. If you've not met that before, have a little Google of that. There's a free to use one, which invariably means that you've got one little class that you can set up, one little room that you can set up and do all kinds of interactive training with that as well. And again, that can be fun as well. That's aimed at sort of primary schools and above, really. So you can have little unicorn races or space rocket races and things like that with your audience and have some fun with it. Microsoft Forms, which is a great platform, and Google Classroom again. And again, there are plenty of these out there. You're possibly already using them, but there are great ways also, of course, of auditing things as well, and knowing the response and how effective your training has been within that. So again, what do users love? They love to have some kind of certificate of completion. All of these online training events that I attend every year give you a little PDF. And if you want, you can download, you can print it off, and you can hang it in your office to say that Phil has completed his counterterrorism for the year, or his diversity in the workplace in the year, and all that kind of thing. Or stick it into a little file. That can go on your HR record. It can go onto your personal development record, and so on and so forth. People love that, myself included. Okay, I like nothing better than getting a little PDF to say, "Well done, you successfully attended this course," and if you've taken a little test in it, you've now met the grade as well. Perfect. Okay, folk like that a lot. Okay, so use it, because invariably it is also a very free, handy way of getting the message across as well. So, but make it fun. As I've already mentioned, so making it worthwhile, I beg your pardon, making it regular is one of those things. It's in the eye of the beholder. How regular is regular? I would probably suggest that this should be looked at least once a year. So it should be part of an annual cycle of review of policy. Invariably, then, once the policy has been reviewed, it would be a good idea to then layer in a user training and awareness session. Now, we've had a strange year. I don't know if you've noticed this, but we have all undergone a whole load of different changes in the way that we do our business, and the way that we have got new technology involved in our business, and so on and so forth. Some of you possibly it's not been that new if you're already remotely working and doing a lot of commuting and all that kind of stuff. However, regardless of that, okay, there would have been a time at this point, probably around about Easter for most of us, so kind of late spring, early summer, where it would have done us no harm whatsoever to have had a user training and awareness session. So if we'd already had one in January, or we had one at Christmas last year, okay, having another one just before we were going to go into lockdown fully, or we're going to move more into this kind of environment, would have been a very nice environment, a good time to potentially have got this in motion. It wouldn't have necessarily had to have been a big session, because the threat picture would not necessarily have changed too much. Certainly from the criminal side of things, it wouldn't have changed too much, and the overall threat and risk wouldn't have changed very much. But our working practices would have changed, and therefore there would have been an impact on our assets, and there would have been a change in the risk picture for our environments. And so, not a bad idea then to have a quick refresh and review of our policies, which would have meant a very quick user training and awareness session for our users that are now moving into working from home, for example, or working remotely in strange environments that they've not been forced to work in. Okay, so a few do's and don'ts, a few tips, invariably some good working practices, and all those kind of things could have been layered in to a nice friendly session to make sure that people were armed, okay, educated, aware, and empowered in their new working environment. Okay, I'm very pleased to say that the company that I work for have done just that. Okay, we've had a whole load of training sessions, in fact, that have been put into us, mostly around the platforms that we've been using, okay, in the awareness side of that, and then built in around the IT department here. Nick and his team have been busy making sure that we have been constantly aware of the threats that have been relevant to us as well. So there's been a lot of, in fact, I've seen it even at a corporate level. In fact, there's been not a lot, but there has been an increased amount of phishing attempts that have been mounted. In fact, there was a very odd one that came my way in Yammer, of all places, just a couple of weeks ago, in fact. So again, I'm a user, just like everybody else, on the Firebrand training network. So I instantly reported the incident to the head of IT, to Nick, who, it was a Sunday night, in fact. So it was a couple of weeks ago. It was Sunday night. I reported it to Nick thinking, right, okay, I've dealt with this, and Nick will get back to me on Monday. Quick as a flash, Sunday evening, Nick was chatting to me about what, where, how, where, and when. And so he then did the research, and together we kind of sorted it out. And it was an application on my mobile phone, I believe, that invariably had got some kind of corruption in it, which was taking me off into sites which were definitely not Yammer, without getting too graphic about it. I don't think that kind of content invariably makes its way onto Yammer too often, certainly not onto the Firebrand sites. Now all cleared and cleaned up, and it's only cleared and cleaned up by virtue of the fact that you had a user, myself, who was aware okay, and ultimately knew the reporting chain in here. I knew exactly who I needed to report this to. I knew exactly what action I needed to take, which was invariably turn it off and wait for further assistance before we got that sorted out. And no further impact has occurred since. So hopefully we dealt with that. Okay, how many of us can actually say that you have that degree of confidence in your end users that they are doing the right thing, even though the threat picture has changed immeasurably for them over the past couple of months? And again, this would be the impact of this little training session with you, is to just take a step back and think about, crikey, is there the risk? Are we leaving ourselves vulnerable to the fact that my users don't know what to do, how to report, or how to react and respond to this new threat picture that we've put themselves into? And the footprint has increased immeasurably, certainly over the past sort of 8 or 9 months. Okay. Remember that it doesn't mean to say that you need to have a formal get together every single time something changes. So, minor changes and things like that would not mean, right, okay, we've got to get a group hug here together, because all you're doing then is you're making it too regular. So it then becomes a chore and people turn off from it. Okay, but updates. And now this is where you can then use online resources. So remember, we spoke about mixing your media a little bit. So users are trained and aware by using a hands-on session, whichever media you're going to use, and then an email update. Okay, and it might be just a quick one-liner, for example, with a threat, or it could be a message on a bulletin board that comes out through Teams or whatever you're using, Amazon. And so the message goes out, so your users are then updated periodically as things go through, without having to have an online meeting. Although, of course, online meetings are a lot easier to facilitate than actually having a physical meeting together. And the technology is so good now that you can use Teams, you can use WebEx, you can use Zoom, plenty of others available to you, where you can share files, you can run video, you can do great graphics, and everything that you'd want to do in a classroom, you can do equally as well, if not potentially a little bit better, by using our online platforms as well. So there's no getting out of the fact that now is a good time to be doing this, and we have the technology in order to do that. Okay, fantastic. We are winding things up. And so the last little bit is really to try and make it as worthwhile as you possibly can. Again, you don't always hit the mark. It's true. And again, I'm a trainer of many years. I'd like to think that most of the training that I put into place is effective, is invariably what the customer wants, or more importantly, is what the delegate wants, and invariably it's a worthwhile experience. Majority of the time, of course, people leave trained with credentials and fulfilled in their training environment, but you can never be 100% in that. There's always going to be a few occasions when you think, right, okay, well, I didn't quite meet the audience expectations with that, or there were 1 or 2 people to whom this wasn't relevant. I get that, okay, and that's going to happen from time to time. Okay, but that doesn't mean to say that you've got to stop trying. Okay, and also trying to be imaginative about it. There's a difference between training and entertaining people. I always sort of say that to people. People generally sort of like a little bit of banter, I suppose. Really, they like a little bit of a joke session, a bit of humour. It goes a long way, in fact, in a long old training day, and it's absolutely crucial. In fact, on my courses, that you come with a sense of humour, I have to say, because if you don't, you'll have one by the end of the week, even though it's dad jokes and Phil's kind of warped sense of humor. But the impact sometimes of telling these stories and sort of putting these things into people's minds is ultimately, there's a learning message there as well. So you can learn things subliminally by sort of making things a bit more jovial and making things a little bit more lighthearted, I suppose, really, rather than the doom and gloom. People are fed up with doom and gloom at the moment. They don't want to hear about the fact that their networks are constantly under attack, and that every email that they receive in their inbox has got some kind of virus attached to it, or some kind of phishing and things like that, because that's not true. Okay, they don't want to hear the doom and gloom about what's happening in the world of cyber, because not everybody is a target constantly. Okay, so, but what they do want to hear is invariably the good news about how they can apply a little bit of first aid to it. So those training sessions that I used to go on, that I dreaded back in my military days, where I put a pair of boots on and that green stuff. Okay, and invariably there were bits in there where I thought, you know what, I hate this. I hope this never happens to me. But the fact that I can put out a fire with a fire extinguisher, and I've got a reasonable success rate, I suppose, really, with doing first aid and things like that, which I put into practice in subsequent years. I'm now thinking, do you know what? Even though I didn't really enjoy the process of that, I learned some stuff and I'm now seeing the benefit of it. And I can go back to that knowledge of all those days, okay, that time and time and time again, where it was routinely and regularly put into me. I learned a whole load of great stuff over that. Okay. And invariably, what it's done is it helped me protect and keep myself safe, I suppose, really, in that process. And if that's a message that you can get across in your user training and awareness sessions, then you're doing a great job. Okay. Get some feedback as well, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. Okay. And again, feedback is also in the eye of the beholder as well. And but user invariably, what you don't want, invariably what you do want is perfect feedback. But invariably, when people just go through and say, yeah, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, and give no comments and things like that, it's a bit of a hollow victory sometimes, in the fact you think, well, you can always, everything has got the scope to improve. So everyone is constantly improving things. So you want it to be constructive. Okay, you don't necessarily want it to be negative and damning. You don't want people to be rude on feedback, but you do, if they do, people do feel that it's not quite hit the mark or that things could have been done slightly better, then you want them to layer that in because you want to improve for the next time or take on board what those comments are, so that you can then focus in on the particular areas that people are interested in. Okay, and always remember, and again, this is a again, from a Firebrand instructor side of things, I think one of the things certainly from my perspective as well, especially moving into the world that I'm moving into, and again, hopefully my law enforcement friends will also advocate that this is true, is that it's not just about the briefing room. Okay, your support and advice and guidance is available pretty much 24/7. Okay, you're always going to be at the end and receptive to an email, okay, to a request for help, or what does this mean, Phil, or have you heard of this, or Phil, you might be interested in this. And I probably receive a good half a dozen to 10 emails a day from either previous delegates, people that I'm working alongside, apprentices, or people that think, oh, Phil Chapman would be interested in this. And they fill up my inbox with love, is what that is. Because even though it takes me, a good sort of portion of my day to actually sift through this stuff and think, oh, that's really neat. I've not thought about that. That's really nice to hear that, and so on and so forth. That's exactly what I want. And if it's something that I need to respond to, for example, I'm overjoyed to do that. And it's outside of the classroom, I suppose, really, is where that love comes from, really, and where that invariably where you're going to win over your users in this battle that sometimes you have with getting them aware of the security implications on your network. So always remember to support your individual users, because they're all important to us, aren't they, at the end of the day? So as much joking aside, invariably as a network engineer, you hate users, but of course hate is not the word that we use invariably, because they are important assets to us. So invariably that's the message I'm going to put out to you. Okay, so make sure you love everybody. There you go. It's nearly Christmas, isn't it? Okay, I think, Phoebe, that is me done. That's pretty good timing. I hasn't really given much time for questions, I'm afraid. But if anything has come in, I've not been looking at the chat side of things.
Nothing as of yet. If anyone has any questions at all, please feel free to ask them in the chat box now and direct them to the everyone option in the group. Laura has said, though, earlier, please do link in with your local police cyber protect teams. All the training is free and will complement and further enhance the training your own in-house teams provide. Your commission is in the post, Phil.
If only that was true. Just send me a pasty, Laura. That's all I need. No, next time I'm next to her, I'll pop in for a pasty and a glass of cider. That's all I need.
Great advice from Graham. Phil, what would you say were the top 2 or 3 courses to take after having done this webinar? What would be the next?
So this is, again, like I sort of said, this is a bit of an odd one, really, because it cuts across a whole load of different aspects, I suppose, really, from the technical side of things. So proper cybersecurity into proper infosec as well. So depending upon your audience, the people that are out there, if we're looking at the infosec side of things, really, I mean, at a foundation level, we're talking about courses such as Security Plus or the new look EC Council Certified Network Defender, the CND course, in fact, are great foundation courses. When I say foundation, you'd need to come in with a little bit of understanding, a depth of knowledge from the world of security, and less so about networking, less so about the technology side of things, but more so about risk. And policy is now a big part of those courses. Those are great courses. In fact, I can advocate those. And then, of course, if we're going over into the world of management, I suppose, really, so CISM courses, for example, a lot out of the ISACA stable as well. IC squared, of course. So the big one there, of course, would be CISP, but that's a top level kind of course, I suppose, really, and credential for users. But that would be the pinnacle, I suppose, really, but what a lot of people would like to gain from that. And then there are plenty of other kind of management courses, I suppose, really, that layer into this as well, from the risk side of things as well. Okay, so C risk, I suppose, really, it kind of dovetails in quite nicely with that. But kind of, the joke at the start was that this is always going to be the right answer. It's very true. Pretty much all of the courses that I deliver, all the way through the BCS packages with the apprentices, the vendor courses from Microsoft, all the way through to EC Council, user training and awareness fits in very, very nicely into all of those.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
There's a conversation about where's the best pasty, so, which is great.
Proper pasty come down to Cornwall.
Yeah. Perfect.
Does anyone else have any questions at all? I mean, Phil, you're incredibly thorough. I'm sure people will contact you directly if they have any questions.
Yeah, please do. Like I said, you've got my email address, so capture that and feel free to use and abuse that. Send some love, send some abuse if you wish, as long as it's constructive. Find me on LinkedIn as well. So become my friend on LinkedIn and hook in there as well. And like we said at the start, this is the last one that I'll be doing for a little while, certainly this side of the Christmas, but hopefully in the new year, we'll pick things up again when it swings round to my kind of line of business as well. So, but outside of that, just please keep in touch.
And we do have sprints available for the rest of the year, and we're building them for Q1 as well. So please make sure to have a look at the homepage. I will pop it in the chat now to see if there are any of interest to you. Please, they are all free, and they all have recordings as well. So get in touch. It's 12 o'clock. It doesn't look like anyone has any questions. I think we'll leave it at that.
Perfect.
Are you happy with that, Phil?
I am, yes. Thanks very much, everybody. Stay safe, of course. Okay, hands, face, and space. It's a great policy.
Indeed, indeed.
And
Thank you, Phil.
if I don't speak to anybody before, then I hope have a great Christmas. Is it too early? Yeah, it's too early, isn't it?
No.
Never too early.
It's the season.
And hopefully I will see you all very, very soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phil. And
Thanks,
have
guys.
a good weekend, all.
Thank you.
Take care.